we didn't need the enemy, just fill the boys full of grog, and they could throw these steel beer cans at each other, open up nasty head gashes and get me to stitch them up without anaesthetic. Even in a big firefight, you know, that it was teamwork and mateship that sort of got them. You weren't fighting against communism or fighting for the flag or the Queen or the Prime Minister or anything. You were fighting for your mates and your survival. A medic's job is to patch them up when they're wounded, not to hang back, and get in and do it, even though you're scared, pretty scared at the time. You're more scared, I think, of not going in and your mates thinking, you know, you haven't got the spine to do it, than actually getting up on your haunches and ducking your head down and getting in there. A cold shower, a good feed, a couple of beers, and they just started to charge up the batteries again. That was a cycle kept going through, and gradually the battery would lose its potency.
Give me a summary of your life up till now.
Sure. I was born in Adelaide in 1945, toward the end of the war. My parents were both in the services. My dad had come from the Middle East and New Guinea, and met my mother along the way, and she was in the Women's Army in the Red Cross, and they married, must have been a lot earlier than 45, and I came along in April 45. I was raised in Adelaide. My parents had another child, my brother, 18 months after I was born, and then they separated, and Mum raised us in Adelaide right through until, until I got the call up, I guess, and then I moved to Victoria with the Army, recruit training at Puckapunyal, medical corps training at Healesville, asked for a move to Keswick in Adelaide to be close to my wife, who I was married to at the time, and I was sent to Waco in Brisbane, which was the opposite end of the country. Yeah. Back when I was 18, I started psychiatric nursing. There were no jobs around in fields that I was interested in, and I went for an aptitude test, and the results of that test were that I was suitable for a job in the medical field. And I asked, well, you know, what does a bloke like me, about to turn 18, do in the medical field? And I was told that there were jobs in the mental hospital in Adelaide, and that I could start when I was 18 and go through a probationary period there, see if I was suitable. Well, it turned out that I did the first year exams and topped the state, and so I seemed to be fairly suitable, and I liked the work, and ended up doing second year nursing there and relaxed a bit and didn't top the state. Came in the middle of the pack because I'd met some young ladies by that stage and married one of them just when I was 20. She was 20, and then the first episode of national service came into being in 1965. I was 20. I think I was either in the first half dozen marbles that were drawn out of the barrel, and I thought, well, you know, I'm going to beat this. I'm not interested in going in the army. I tried to join the Navy at 17 and was rejected because I wore glasses, being short-sighted. And I thought, well, I'm not going to go in the army now. I'm married and got 2 mortgages and so on, and I think we had a child on the way at that stage. Anyway, I went into the recruiting office and I said to them, look, I'm married and you know, I'm not interested in going. What's the go? And they said, oh, well, if you're married by such and such a date, you're okay. So, you know, go home and forget about it, basically. So I did, until I got the notice saying report in for a medical. So I went in to do the medical, and I said to them, look, I was told that I didn't have to go because I'm married by this date. And they said, oh, well, we changed the dates and weren't you notified? I said, no, I wasn't. or sorry, but you still have to do the medical and there's a chance that you could be called up. I said, oh, well, I'll still beat this. And I'd had a hemorrhoid popped out shortly before that, and I thought, gee, that'll get me out. They don't take blokes with flat feet, hemorrhoids and glasses, surely, you know. Anyhow, I went in for the medical, and the doctor doing the medical said, look, mate, we're very short of medical staff. You're semi-qualified, and everything else is fine. You know, they'll take you with glasses, and there's no signs of the hemorrhoid at the moment. I said, oh, damn. So went home and had another interview. That's right. And I said, look, what can I do? I'm married. I've got 2 mortgages. I've got a child on the way. I finished second year nursing, and I'd like to finish the course. By all means, finish the course. And I thought, how can I extend this? Right, I can do psychiatry. That's 3rd year. That qualifies me as a psychiatric nurse. And there's mental deficiency that I could do. Right, so I'll drag it along a bit. And they said, yeah, you can have 18 months and do your courses and then come and see us. And I thought by then this place called Viet Nam, the bit of a stir over there would be all over. Of course it wasn't. And I still thought in the back of my mind that I wouldn't be in the army. Had no interest. So, but when I had finished my courses, went in. That's right, his son was 2 months old then, born in February. So he came a little bit later on, which was good for all those that were watching the calendars. So I was destined to go into the army in the 8th intake, having been due to go in on the 1st intake in 65. I delayed it until the 8th intake, which was April 67. Went down to the depot, flew to Puckapunyal in Victoria, did the 10 weeks basic training, running, jumping, shooting, all the rest of it. Had 4 days leave in the middle of it to come home, and it was like coming home to strangers. The army was insidiously getting a grip on me, I suppose, as they try to do. So at recruit training we had a priorities list that we could pursue. And my first priority was medical corps. My second was catering. I thought that'd be a good safe job. And I thought just for a laugh I'll put down infantry. And as it was, I ended up becoming a medic in the infantry and doing most of my own cooking with ration packs later on. So they gave me medical because I was a trained nurse. It seemed fairly obvious, even though some fellows that were qualified engineers were getting artillery and infantry, and blokes that were suitable for infantry were getting engineers and artillery. They weren't very bright down at recruit training. They were full of rejects down there. So I got medical and was posted to Hillsville, which is a really freezing cold mountaintop or hilltop canvas city looking across at the snowfields for 10 weeks. So for 10 weeks, excuse me, I was relearning medical, anatomy, physiology, bandaging techniques and so on, stuff that I just qualified as a nursing sister. And I said to them, look, this is no good to me. I want to start getting some money as a qualified medic. I'm wasting my time here. Please send me to another unit. And they said, no, you've got to finish the course. So I finished the 10-week course, getting 99% for some things and 75% for things I wasn't really interested in, like making stretches and jogging and things like that. And finished the course, got posted to Waco, was there a short time. And seeing that I was 22 years old and most of the Nashos there were only 20, they made me a corporal overnight after I've been in the army 8 months with no training. They just said, right, sew these 2 stripes on and tomorrow you're a corporal. It meant more pay, which was good because I was losing about a third of my pay from my nursing job at the hospital. Going in the army, I was losing about a third, and things were a bit tight at home. So from Wacol, most of the medics there, having gone through Hillsville, were destined to be sent to the hospital at Vung Tau in Viet Nam. And I thought, well, that's not too bad. I work in a hospital in Adelaide. I'm in the army. I'm going over to work at Vung Tau. It'll be different sort of nursing. It'll be battlefield casualties coming in, and it'll be totally different. There'll be very little psychiatry, but yeah, it'll be okay. And I'm only there for, the 12 months. And then I got a posting to Enoggera, to 4 Battalion, out of the blue. I didn't know why or how until I wrote my book recently, and my doctor wrote the foreword in it, and he was the medical doctor for 4R, and he had 2 staff that he wanted to get rid of. They were real duds before they went to Viet Nam, and he wanted to get 2 replacements. So my mate Daryl and I were posted from Wacol across to Enoggera. Suddenly we were infantry medics, and we did our exercises up at Tin Can Bay, Shoalwater Bay, and I learned how to suture people up, and how to carry a medical bag and a rifle, and got issued with an Armalite as opposed to the SLR that everybody had. And I thought it was an imitation at first, being mostly plastic and fiberglass, but I found that it could do the job. Then we did Canungra, and I'd already done a course at Greenbank with the medical people at Wacol, which was just as gruelling, if not more so, than Canungra. So Canungra to me was relatively easy. And then had pre-embarkation leave in Adelaide, when I realised that things weren't too good with my wife down there, and went off to Viet Nam as part of the rear party from 4 Battalion. While I was on leave, the battalion had embarked on the aircraft carrier to go over there, and I was to fly back to Enoggera, tidy up a few things, hand over to the incoming regiment from Viet Nam, 2RA, and then fly Qantas off to the war, which was a bit of a shock. Quite a cold Brisbane evening, leaving, getting into Singapore, stinking hot, then flying to Saigon, even worse, with all the jets and the helicopters and the noise and the people, diggers, Air Force people everywhere, just the confusion of the whole place. Waiting around in the airport with a cardboard box with a sandwich in it, I think a piece of fruit, a rifle magazine with 20 rounds in it, and no rifle. It was the other way around, sorry. We had the rifles but no magazines. They were travelling separate. They thought we might be dangerous if we put the magazines on. We hopped in a Caribou aircraft and flew up to Nui Dat, which probably took about 20 minutes, half an hour. Dropped in there into a red dusty area, got offloaded onto some trucks, was taken around to the 4 Battalion RAP, and suddenly I was in Viet Nam, and that's where my job was, temporarily, at the RAP, until I became a medic out in one of the rifle companies. After one of the medics suffered from heat exhaustion on operations, I was helicoptered in, he was helicoptered out, and I stayed with that company, B Company, from September through to March, and had quite a few adventures. So in Viet Nam I was an infantry medic, a company medic, responsible for about 120 men in the camp and in the bush, anything from tinea to bullet wounds, blast wounds, just about anything that happened, scorpion bites. I was the medic in charge, and my decisions were final as to evacuating somebody by helicopter, or keeping them in the bush, or prescribing what I had in my medical kit, from injections to sutures to some minor surgery with a scalpel. All good fun. but enduring the conditions with the diggers, digging a hole to sleep in every night, carrying 30 kilos on the back, carrying 100 rounds of ammunition and your rifle and grenades and claymore mines and so on. So I got through Viet Nam and flew home again, so quickly over there, quickly back, flew into Sydney with the Charlie Company medic Darryl. Next morning he flew off to Rockhampton, his hometown, and I flew down to Adelaide, and I eventually found him again 34 years later, and we had a big reunion. I flew to Adelaide to find that my wife had left, and it was a big shock, but the bigger shock I think was coming from Vietnam to Australia, finding that Australia was still ticking over, still grinding along, doing everything that they did. The war didn't affect very many people, and secondary, I suppose, was the shock of coming home and finding the house empty and broke, because I'd been sending the majority of my money home as an allowance, and having to go straight back to work, and the people at work wondering where the heck I'd been on night shift, been working in another ward for a while, people hadn't seen me. Gradually settled back into that, and I think 3 or 4 months later I was notified. I was at home one day and an officer came walking up my driveway, the Charlie Company commanding officer from 4 Battalion, and I thought, what the hell is he doing here? You know, I've done my time. I was thinking very negatively, and he said, "Congratulations, Mr. Brown, you've won the military medal." And I had no idea what a military medal was, and he didn't really explain it very well. He just said it's for bravery in the field. I thought, oh, all right, you know, that's interesting. And he said, can you remember on which occasion you might have, you know, won the medal? I said, no, I really wouldn't have a clue. And he said, oh, well, there'll be a report in tomorrow's paper and you'll find out about it. Okay. So that was that. And the next day the reporters all came flocking around, as they do, journalists there. And they said to me the same thing, you know, what did you do? I said, well, I don't have a clue. So the headline in the paper was "The Hero Who Forgot." And then I copped a bit of flack at work from that, you know, how's your memory and so on. Because one fellow at work, or maybe several people at work, thought that I was actually working in a psychology branch in Saigon, printing pamphlets to airdrop over the enemy, like surrender and they will look after you and all that sort of stuff. No, I was actually out in the field as a medic. So this award that I got let everybody know just what I'd been doing. Then there was a short write-up in the paper that Corporal Brown had moved forward and under the rocket fire and and rescued the wounded. And I thought, oh, that sounds pretty good. And that's not quite how it happened, but... And then a few months after that, I was actually at Government House with my mother and another medic mate of mine, and got presented with a medal, even at that stage thinking that they'd made a bit of a blue and they'd got the wrong bloke, and I was going to say sorry and just cancel the whole deal, but I got it and still got it. And anyhow, then I got back to work and things settled down a bit, and I had ideas of writing a book about my experiences, and I thought, oh, I better not write the proper names in and the places and that, people might get upset, so I made it fiction based on fact. And I wrote about half a book and it sounded a bit daggy, so I left it for a while. And then I picked it up later and put the real names in and the real actions and finished it 18 months ago. Then I met this lovely young lady, nurse at the hospital, and we married. And then we moved to Queensland. I did that until I realised I was having problems with work and home and with life in general, and later found out that I was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And one of the psychiatrists I'd been working with went into private practice. I went to see him for a double session. I filled out his questionnaire. He analysed it and said, you've got post-traumatic stress disorder, you have chronic depression, and you won't be working in the field of psychiatry for much longer. It just doesn't work. I thought, I'll prove you wrong. I'm going to work till I'm 60. Then I'll retire and I'll do other things. 18 months later, I was not working. I was TPI pensioner, living quietly and getting things back on track. And I'm the Vice President of the Palmwoods RSL. I'm in the Viet Nam Veterans Association. I'm a member of the Project Viet Nam group, which goes to Vietnam, rebuilding and reconstructing. And I'm going over to teach English later this year. So that's where I'm at the moment.
So when did you first get a call from the army, and how did that come to you?
I think I was doing second year. I just finished second year, just turning 20 as per the requirement for the first intake, and I got a notice. I didn't watch the draw on TV or anything like that, or look at the numbers. I just got a notice saying, you have been selected. Please come and meet the board, or come and present yourself, whatever it was. That's all a bit vague. I know it was a bit of a shock. I got infantry anyway.
What had you heard about the Vietnam War leading up to them calling you up?
Virtually nothing. I don't recall remembering anything at that time. I probably saw it on the news and read it in the paper, but it didn't affect me. No one I knew was there. I had no plans of going there. Had I been in the Navy at that stage, I would have been 3 years into a Navy career. I probably would have thought a lot about it, going there, or popping in there anyway, to Fung Tau or somewhere. But I had no thoughts whatsoever. Didn't know where it was.
And what did you think about war generally at that age?
I suppose the adventure still appealed. My great-grandfather had been in the Boer War as an Englishman. Grandfather had been at Gallipoli on day 2. Had tried to go away to World War II with his 2 sons, but was posted to Darwin and kept there. My dad went to the Middle East and New Guinea. My uncle flew, bow fighters, another uncle in the Navy, another uncle through Borneo and Malaya and so on. And I thought, part of me wanted to go and see if I could sort of cope. But the other part of me wanted to stay home and be at home. I had basketball, spearfishing, a good job, a son, a wife.
Newly married?
Newly married. Everything was great. Bliss. And then 2 years away, it's just the other side of the country, you know.
When the marble first got picked and you went into the office, were there many? What was the feeling in that office, and what do you remember about it?
I didn't see any other fellows. I was just me, the interviewer, and home again. So I had no idea. I first met people going into the army at the airport. At Keswick Barracks, getting in a bus to go to the airport to fly to Puckapunyal. And the fellow sitting next to me was John Ackland, who ended up in my battalion, but I didn't know at the time.
Had you fired a gun before?
Yeah, I'd had a 22, but it was just a natural eye coordination thing, I think. And,
Did it occur to you early on that the possibility that you might have to kill people, or even the thought of being killed yourself?
Not early in training, no, because I didn't even think about going to Vietnam. I thought, we're in the army, we're just here to boost the numbers in the army, because there's only 30,000 normally, and with the war on, and Malaya was still happening, I think. And there was also the threat about that time of Israel and Palestine and Egypt, another flare-up over there, and we were talking about getting issued with camels and khakis rather than jungle greens, so we sort of had a bit of an idea that we might go to the Middle East. So we said, oh well, we're in the army now. But killing, maybe when we're on the bayonet range, when they had a big bag full of straw and you put the bayonet on the rifle and you stuck it in and pulled it out and yelled out, in, out, on guard, and yelled your head off. You think, truth, I hope I never have to stick one of these into a bloke. It'd probably be a very hard thing to do. But you probably thought about it then and thought, oh no. And the targets were sort of man-shaped, but no, they were just targets. It was probably later on at Canungra and places like that, where you had blokes that had been to the war and come back, and they were telling you that the Viet Cong have got big mines because they're bigger than it, you know, better mines because they're bigger than ours, and they've got nails and concrete and glass in them, and they will kill you and maim you and so on, and you know, so you've got to be very careful. I think, well, they're trying to kill us, they are the enemy, you know, and you sort of developed a latent hatred, I suppose, of them because they were killing our blokes. And one of our corporals there had been wounded. He didn't tell us how or why, but we'd heard that he'd been wounded, and that's why he was a bit grumpy all the time.
Did you notice anyone not coping with the army environment?
There was one bloke that in another hut, we had 16 in each hut, one bloke in another hut, they nicknamed him Granny, I think. He just wasn't coping very well, and they gave him a hard time, but he passed. We only had one bloke who failed the course, and that's because he broke both his arms. A lot of our exercises were going up ropes and across and down, and he got halfway across and he was about 3 metres off the ground, and he fell and landed on his hands and broke both his wrists, so he got delayed into the next call up and eventually got through. But I think everybody passed physically and psychologically.
Can you tell us that story you were going to tell us about the first camp?
Puckapunyal. Our first camp out, overnight camp out at Puckapunyal, having learned how to put a tent up and so on, we marched a couple of kilometres out of camp, and this barren area just full of small shrubs, and it was raining and it was sleeting and it was just really cold and miserable and muddy. We put our tents up after a fashion, and we dug little trenches around them, which didn't work, and most of the tents ended up full of water. And when we did dig, we found that we had camped on some foul ground, which we didn't realise, and that's where the previous camp, or the camp some time back, had camped, and they'd buried all their rubbish and their shit pit and urinal and everything. We camped smack bang on top of that, and our leader decided that we weren't going to stop there, so he said, righto, pack up the gear, we'll go back to camp. And we thought, gee, that's all right. And so we went back to camp and did almost the same thing a couple of months later at Healesville. Medical corps training for Viet Nam, usually fairly hot. They decided to do a camp out just to test how we could put tents up and so on. They took us up into, I think, the foothills of Mount Buffalo or Mount Buller, somewhere down that way, and it started to snow. So we were camping in the snow, preparing for Viet Nam. And the meal came out in the jeeps, and it was a hot box with stew and stuff, which was quite nice, and ice cream and fruit salad from memory. So we were freezing cold, and it was just a mongrel thing, we thought. So we marched back to camp next day and thought, gee, this is great training.
You hadn't been eager to get into the army, really, although
No.
you said that you were. And when you first started at Puckapunyal, you were a bit rebellious, I said. Was there a point at which you actually started enjoying it and thinking this is okay?
Oh yeah, there were lots of times. I enjoyed the physical side, getting fit, playing basketball, shooting, camping out. I actually enjoy camping out when it's done properly, not on foul ground. Getting the rations, there was a bit of excitement. What can you do with a ration pack, and can you make it edible and that sort of thing.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that whole episode when you were first called up with the ballot, and you actually deferred from having to join up. How did you go about doing that?
I went into the office, the recruiting office, or the National Service.
Was it easy to defer? Was it something?
Apparently, yeah. I didn't have to struggle with it, to force them or anything. I just said, look, I'm doing psychiatric nursing. I've got third year to finish, and I'd like to do mental deficiency. And they said, well, how long is that going to take? I said, well, it should be finished by April 67. They said, okay.
And did you ultimately, were you hoping that you'd be able to get out of it altogether?
99% of me was hoping to get out, but then a small part of me was saying, gee, it'll be an adventure. this is the Navy you missed out on. You can travel, you can be with the blokes, you can, you know, perhaps go to, or not go to war necessarily, but be in the forces. You know, it would, part of my growing up, maturing, making me complete, I suppose.
Sure. So at Puckapunyal, at a certain point, were you able to select where you would be going from there, or was there a choice about what would happen to you?
Yeah, you could put your 3 preferences in, and a lot of people said, well, we're all going to get infantry. And I thought, oh, it's truth. But I put medical, catering and infantry, and got medical, got my first choice.
How did the training change for you from Puckapunyal to Healesville?
We did very little shooting. I think the shooting we did do was with Owen machine guns, which were pretty pathetic. They could spit the bullets out fairly slowly. A reasonable amount of running and fitness things, but nowhere near as much as Puckapunyal. A little bit of marching, but mostly lectures and practical demonstrations on anatomy and physiology, making stretchers, how to carry, how to get over obstacles with stretchers, how to bandage, a fair bit of that, because we're expected to be dealing with casualties. And the stuff, for me it was pretty boring because I just finished my nursing, 4 years of it, and you know, so the anat and phys and stuff was just a bit tedious, and I wanted to get on and start earning some money, so.
At this point in time, did you have the expectation that you would go to Vietnam?
It was starting to sink in about then, yeah, because I think our instructors then were saying, you know, a certain amount of you will be going, especially the medical people, because when they signed me on, they said we're very short of medics, and it really wouldn't matter if you had one leg and one arm, you'd probably still go in. So, yeah. And
what were your thoughts about that?
I think at that stage I was beginning to think, go and work at the hospital. So it won't be too bad. It won't be in the action. It won't be dangerous.
So while you were at Healesville, having done 4 years of nursing and so forth, was there anything that you really feel you learnt there that was significant?
How to make a stretcher and how to carry people and how to bandage wounds. I think it was at Healesville that they had a technique where they made up mock wounds out of plastic and tomato sauce and to look like blood, and a special technique that I can't, mucilage I think might be the name for it, but they'd have these mock wounds, and they would, if they didn't have that, they'd have a piece of paper there saying this bloke has got a head wound, a sucking chest wound, and a through and through wound of the left femur, and you would get that and think, right, what do I have to do? What's the priority? And that was good training in prioritising wound treatments, and that helped.
So when you finished at Healesville, you qualified as a medic.
Mm.
Yeah. In terms of the medical training you received there, what were you expecting to see if you did go to Vietnam in terms of what were you expecting to treat?
I was expecting, I think at that stage, to go to the hospital and treat bullet wounds and so on, not really having seen any of them, and just do more medical work and take it as it comes. And
so you were sent to Wacol. Can you tell us what happened when you arrived in Wacol after the train trip?
Well, from the freezing cold of Healesville, at Wacol, it was an unseasonal cyclone was around, and there were floods all around, and it was humid and wet and hot, and we were raking leaves, painting the rocks white, basically wasting time, marching, running, doing nothing that I can recall that was constructive, no more training that I can recall, until some of us were chuffed off to One Mill Hospital at Yeronga to work in the Army Hospital there, and I did that for a little while, and they must have found me unsuitable or something, because then I was sent back to Wacol and made into a corporal. Was it before that? Might have made a corporal before that. Got to Wacol, I was there a couple of months, and I was called in to the office, and the captain said, "Come in, Corporal Brown." I was walking past the office. He said, "Come in, Corporal Brown." I said, "I'm Private Brown, sir." He said, "Come in, Corporal Brown, take a seat." I said, "I'm Private Brown, sir." He said, "No, you're Corporal Brown. As from tomorrow, when you've sewn your stripes on, you'll be Corporal Brown." And I said, "Well, what does all this mean?" He said, "Well, it means you have to be a bit more responsible around the place. You're 22, you're older than the others, you're medically trained, you seem fairly mature." Thank you. "And you're going to have to do night duties and so on, and pickets and sort of corporal, non-commissioned officer, NCO duties." I thought, "It's truth, that means I'm going to have to dob my mates in, and, you know." I thought, "Oh, I'm not going to enjoy this very much." So I thought, I won't dob them in anyway, I'll just go through the motions." And he said, "It'll mean a small pay increase." I said, "Oh, that's nice." So it's a temporary corporal at 8 months, and remained so until the end of the 2 years, with never any training in the job, which was a shame, because I sort of flew by the seat of my pants as a corporal.
You mean never any training as an NCO?
Yeah.
So you never received any specific training?
How to drill people, how to charge people, nothing. Whereas it is quite an involved course, apparently. And just after that, I went back to Wacol, and they said, "Pack your bags, you're going to 4 Battalion. And this is when I was starting to look at the list every day on the board, thinking, who's the next group going to Vung Tau in Viet Nam? Because we were all expecting to trickle feed that system, be medical orderlies or medical assistants. I was a medical assistant, which is a slightly higher qualification. The orderlies did the ordinary work, and the medical assistants did the more involved procedures. So I said, "Righto, you're going off to 4R." And I said, "Oh yeah, this will just be for a couple of weeks or whatever, like I've been doing in these other units." And I got there and I found they were gearing up for Viet Nam. And then the doctor said to me, "Well, we're off to Viet Nam, I've got to teach you, what don't you know?" And I said, "Well, I've been to Hillsville, I'm a psych nurse," and so on. And I think a few weeks later, out at one of our camps at Tin Can Bay, he said to me, "Do you know how to suture?" I said, "Oh, no." And we had a patient sitting there with a big cut on his wrist, and he said, "Right, we're going to teach you now." I thought, "Oh, he's going to show me now." He said, "No, you're going to do it, and I'm going to talk you through it." Didn't know how the bloke felt about it. But so I started sticking needles into the margins of the wound to anaesthetise it, and the needle already had the thread on it, so it was a needle attached in black silk, and stitch him up, and he showed me how to do the knots with the forceps and clip them off and pull the wound together without pulling it too tight and ripping it apart. Oh, that's a bit of fun. Yeah, so suddenly I was over at 4R and training for Viet Nam.
So when you got to 4AR, what did you observe about what they were doing in terms of preparing for going to Vietnam?
Yes, well, firstly they'd acquired us 2 new medics, Darryl Farry and myself, to replace the 2 duds that they'd got rid of. Apparently one bloke was out on exercise and an officer had broken his ankle, and this fellow examined him and said, "No, it's not broken, you can keep walking on it, sir." So they got rid of him, and I don't know what the other fellow did. But Doc Lewis was only a new young doctor, but he was teaching us about malaria and bandaging and suturing and getting equipment ready and boxing it up ready to go over on the ship. And I think about 65% of the unit were Nashos, so we had a fair filling of Nashos. And the regulars mostly had come back from Malaya, so they were veterans. And I think a lot of them were under the impression that Vietnam was going to be like Malaya, where I think they had one bloke killed from a tree falling on him, which not a lot of action, a couple of minor contacts. But it took a while to get in there, being the new medic. All these blokes had trained together, right from probably recruit training, infantry training, and then to 4R. That's their 3rd move, whereas mine was about the 5th or 6th move.
And what sort of preparation were you given prior to going to Vietnam about what you would face in Vietnam itself? What sort of training were you given?
We were given a little green book which described the enemy as wearing black pyjamas and wearing conical hats and having a range of weapons which were all described, and how we were to treat, if we caught them, captured them, how we were to treat them. A little bit of the basic language, how to tell them to halt, I'll shoot, very basic things, very little of which was helpful. Nothing practical.
So no specifics about
Nothing,
exactly what
nothing.
you were going to be faced with?
Going into the unknown.
What about in terms of what was happening in the war and how it was progressing?
Didn't have much of an idea. Probably read it in the papers, saw it on the news. Long Tan had been and gone and didn't recall it. Just the here and now and day to day, the happenings, the training, the meeting the blokes, mostly RAP, cooks and mechanics.
How many medics were there in the one battalion?
Each company had one, so just counting the Australians, there was B, C and D company. Admin company had one, support company had one, and there were one or two at the RAP, so about 7. And then we had 2 Kiwi companies that joined us in Viet Nam, so there were 2 Kiwi medics. Yeah, and a staff sergeant, he was our boss, and he was not liked by anybody. He was an angry old man, we thought. He didn't want to be there, and was pretty tough on us most of the time.
What was his background?
No idea. Yeah.
So you don't know where he'd been
No.
before? How well prepared did you feel you were before you went to Vietnam?
I thought I was prepared. I thought, yeah, I've done this training and I've done that training. I'm a psychiatric nurse. I was 23 by then. Had a few runs on the board. Yeah, see what happens. I was confident.
Were you confident as a soldier and a medic?
Less confident as a soldier, I think, until I'd been out in the bush a few times and went through the camping routines and the patrols and did my picket duties and sort of relaxed a bit into Vietnam mode. But pretty confident, yeah.
Were the medics as well trained as other soldiers as a soldier?
No, not really. Did a lot less drills and ambush techniques and so on. But that wasn't their role. So they could, each company with a medic, the medic could stay back with company headquarters with the major and the 2IC and the signallers and intelligence bloke and the mortar rep and so on. So you're a different group doing a different operation. You're the brains trust, the organiser, and you send the platoons out to do their patrols. And there you have to be switched on in the infantry thing. And that's where the stretcher bearers, who are actually infantry, but trained in bandaging and so on.
So can you tell us about when you finally were told that you were going to Vietnam? And
Yeah, well, I guess you gradually got used to it at Inogra with 4R, that the unit's going, therefore I'm going. I think I tried to get life insurance too, and they refused me because I was going to Vietnam. And that didn't make me feel too good. So it's truth, what's going to happen to the family if I get bowled over there?
so if you died in Vietnam, your family was going to get what?
Nothing. Yeah, they would get the final leave pay that I was due, and would have been much, a couple of $100 probably. Yeah.
So after that, you...
I did hear that Vietnam was going to be tax-free too, so there'd be a bit more money coming in to send home, or to be allocated home. It all had happened automatically, and I could do haircuts over there, and I wouldn't be spending much over there. I think a beer was 10 cents, and cigarettes were 10 cents a pack. I was a smoker then. I guess I was looking forward in some ways to getting on with it and getting into it and see what happened.
So can you tell us about the trip over there?
We got on we were bussed or trucked. Somehow we got from Inogra to Brisbane Airport, and it was freezing cold and windy, and we were in our polyesters, which are artificial material, our uniform, sitting in the plane shivering, and this is about 9 or 10 o'clock at night from memory. And I think we flew straight to Singapore, had a bit of a doze on the plane, got to Singapore on daybreak, got off the plane, walked over to the terminal, had a 7-Up, which is my first experience of 7-Up, lemonade. Had a bit of a break there, got back on the plane, flew into Saigon, and we had to join a queue up in the sky there, flying in spirals to stay out of rocket range. And we were in a queue for some time, and we sort of zoomed in our Qantas 727 or 707 and got out, and I think we had the rifles issued to us, but no magazines, no ammo, and a sandwich in a plastic or cardboard box. And waited in the airport for a while, and were directed onto a Caribou. Sat in the webbing seats in the Caribou, which is a short takeoff aircraft. About half hour, 40 minutes later, we were at Nui Dat. We got out at Luscombe Field at the Dat, and got into trucks to deliver us to our units. And I was dropped off at the 4 RAP with my bags, feeling jet lagged and hot and dusty and that, and went into the RAP and met the crew, the doctor and the medics, a couple of medics that were there, and the staff sergeant. And the staff sergeant said, "Righto, you've had a bit of a bludge, you can be on night duty tonight." And, okay. No training whatsoever in the new RAP. You're on night duty tonight. Thank you very much.
What were your first impressions of Nui Dat?
Flying in, we could see through the porthole of the Caribou that it was a big square area of rubber trees and a little knobby hill, which was Nui Dat. Nui Dat sort of means small mountain or little hill. And you couldn't see very much at all of the establishment there, because there were 5,000 troops, artillery, engineers, infantry camps and so on. You couldn't see much, but you could see two airstrips, one that the Caribous land on and one for the helicopters on the other side. So it was a bit of an impression, but it didn't sort of settle things, what it was really going to be like on the ground.
So what happened after you got settled in? What was the first work that you were doing?
Well, I was on night duty the first night there. Luckily not much happened, and I sort of my tent was just out the back of the RAP. I was in a 4-man tent with another medic, the hygiene bloke, and another fellow, can't remember. But the RAP was a big aluminium building about 20 or 30 metres long and about 10 or 15 metres wide, with a cement floor. And inside was a couple of offices and an area, a treatment area with benches and cupboards, and very basic. The bench was actually a couple of boards with a green army sheet over it on a trestle, and very, very basic. So my first night, I don't remember treating anybody, but I was there and looking around and looking at all the gear and familiarising myself with what was available, looking through the treatment books, because the battalion had only been there a couple of weeks at that stage. The advanced party and the main party had arrived and settled in, and being the rear party, I was the latecomer.
So looking through the treatment books, what were you seeing at that stage?
I think a fair bit of it was heat rash. We just weren't acclimatised. We'd come from a Brisbane winter to the middle of the wet season in Viet Nam, which is pretty bad, and lots of blokes had heat rash, and it was irritated by soaps and the dirt, and we were, after a short time there, we were experimenting with vitamin C intravenously, and that didn't do anything either. So the main treatment was rest and cold water, which is pretty hard to get over there when you're supposed to be out fighting. Don't recall much of what was in the books. but we used to rotate. Every third or fourth night I'd be on duty there, and every day on duty. You don't get weekends off or anything. You're there every day and you're on call 24 hours a day if anything happens. But at night I got involved in a couple of card games in the next tent with the drivers, and go down the boozer and have a couple of beers. So gradually got used to camp life and going down to the mess tent, and which was actually a hut, and eating ether eggs for breakfast, which tasted bitter, and preserved food and instant mashed potatoes and powdered milk, and yeah, all the little things.
What was happening in the conflict at that stage?
We didn't know much about what was going on. We'd lobbed in there. Tourah had gone home. They'd finished their tour. We had no idea how many casualties, or I had no idea how many had been killed, how many had been wounded, what the situation was. I think I'd only been there a couple of days, and we went out on a one-day operation just to get us used to getting into a whole group of helicopters, flying out somewhere, dropping in, digging in, doing a few short patrols, back into the helicopters, back to Nui Dat, all in one day. So that was up to the Bin Bar Rubber, which was only about 5 or 10 kilometres away. And I was involved in that. The doctor and I went up on that one. And we helicoptered in. The first thing I saw was a rubber tree with this, looked like an upturned dish at the base of it, and I thought, there's a mine there. I was a little bit taken aback, and I said to one of the other diggers there, a Malaya veteran, I said, oh, is that a mine there? He said, no, it's a rubber tapper's bowl. Oh, good, Durr. So, and a few minutes after that, I saw a snake come slithering past, and it was red and yellow and white, a multicoloured snake. And I thought, oh dear, this is a bit dangerous. And but the rest of the day, nothing happened. No shots were fired. Nobody found anything. No one attacked us. We hopped back in the helicopters and went back to Nui Dat. I thought, oh well, that's one. Yeah, this is going to be pretty quiet. Yeah, this will be all right. Fine. And then, probably a couple of weeks later, back at Nui Dat doing different things, and I think a Kiwi cook had got badly burnt one day, so he was one of our first major treatment things, and I went out with the ambulance, which was just a jeep with a tray on the back, to the Kiwi lines, which is probably a couple of 500 metres away. Picked up this big Maori Kiwi with all these big blisters sticking out of his body, like big water balloons hanging off him. A petrol stove had blown up. So we got him in there and filled him up with morphine and got him on the helicopter and off to hospital. And just after that, there was an operation for about a week, and the doctor and I were on this one, and what happened there? Trying to focus too. Yeah, we helicoptered in, that's right, yeah. It's chapter 1 in my book, First Contact, when it all changed a bit. Yeah, we helicoptered in, we dug a pit for the doctor and a pit for ourselves to jump into if we got shot at, shell scrapes. We set up the medical gear, set up a bit of a tent, and we're only going to be there for a couple of days in this one spot, so we didn't set it up too well. And the rifle companies would fly in through our area. So B company would go off that way and do a patrol, C company would go off there, D company would go over here, Whiskey company over there, and Victor company might be the company that looks after battalion headquarters, the safety area. And we dug in there, and Delta company had a bloke shot within about an hour or two of us being there. And we thought, well, this will be a casualty coming to us and we'll patch him up. And we got all the gear ready. And by the time they finally got him out of the firing line, a helicopter was able to go in and take him straight to hospital. And we thought, oh well, that's it. But someone's been shot, Struth. What's going on? And then the companies had their different minor actions. And then it went all quiet for a couple of days, and they said, right, we're going to move a few kilometres away. So we jumped to the helicopters again, moved again, dug in again, and the Kiwis had found a bunker system and attacked it, and one of their scouts had got right almost up to the bunkers, and the commanding officer called artillery in over the top of them into the bunker system, and one had hit the tree and sprayed shrapnel and wounded this bloke in both thighs, and he had big holes through both thighs from one piece of shrapnel that went whack, 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 and come out the other side. And
How big would shrapnel be to do that?
that shrapnel was probably about, so big, probably a jagged piece of metal that hit from the side, went right through the muscles there, out that side, through this one, and it was just like mincemeat in both legs when we found him. And the doctor and I and a few others were in the RAP area, and the Kiwi patrol was going in, because they'd pulled out and left him in there, and the Kiwi patrol was going to go in and rescue him, and so they said, does anyone want to come and give us a hand? And I said, yeah, I'll come with you, not thinking, and it was no shooting going on at that stage, so I went off with this patrol. We went probably 50, 100 yards through the bush, and they opened up on us with machine guns and whatever they had, and luckily we had a bit of a depression and we all dived into that, flattened out, no one else got hit, and they continued firing for several minutes, and we just lay there, and I had a smoke, I remember, to try and settle down. First time I'd ever been shot at, and there were probably thousands of rounds zipping around just over our heads, and shreds of leaves and twigs and things coming down. Anyway, then it stopped, and then I was laying there still, and a couple of the Kiwis had gone forward and grabbed this bloke and dragged him back into our position, because the enemy had gone. They decided to clear off. So,
Could you see them from where you were?
no, all you could hear was the shots. I didn't get up and look there. I just got down as low as I could and had my smoke.
What were the Kiwis saying to you or to each other?
I think they were just hand signals. They'd been there about 6 months. The Kiwi units overlapped every 12 months, but 6 months either side of us, sort of thing. So they'd been there 6 months. They were very experienced, and so they were just sort of, and got the bloke back. We bandaged him up, and we took him out to where the doctor was, and bandaged him up some more and put an intravenous drip in. And I was squeezing on the plastic bag with the drip, trying to really get his blood volume back up, because he'd lost a lot. His name was Private Dill, D-I-L, and I thought, this is a crazy war, and they got crazy names, even the soldiers. Imagine being called Dill. Anyway, I'm squeezing on the bag, and I'm kneeling over him, and there's a helicopter hovering above, and it was going to try and winch him up, but they said, well, we can't winch him up on a jungle penetrator, that's like an anchor, because he's got smashed thighs. We're going to have to get a stretcher or some other means of getting him down, and there's all these tall trees around, and it couldn't land. So the helicopter threw out a canvas and leather and metal harness to strap around him, and I was leaning over him, and it hit me on the back of the neck from about 60 feet up and knocked me out. So they peeled me off and put me to one side, put the harness on him and winched him up into the chopper. Then I came to, and I'm watching him spiralling up to the chopper. Then the winch jammed and they couldn't get him in. So he was sort of swinging under the chopper, and we didn't see it, but apparently the chopper went away towards a clearing and then cut the wire and dropped him on the ground from not very high up. And B Company happened to be patrolling in that area, and they came in and rescued him and loaded him in the chopper, and off he went to hospital. And I had a sore neck and back. And then, somehow or other, that Kiwi patrol, about 6 blokes and the doctor and I, were trying to get back to battalion headquarters, and we must have taken a wrong turn, or we got lost near the bunker system, and it was getting dark. So we spent the night out in the bush on our own with no radio and completely bushed. So in the morning, Well, we decided to camp in a reed bed. So if the enemy tried to attack us during the night, we'd hear them come across these dry reeds. They'd go crunch, crunch, crunch. So it was like a mattress. So laying down on the dried reeds, and during the night the reeds sort of collapsed into the water. And I woke up sort of wet down one side, and I went to urinate just away from the others a little bit, and found that I had a big tiger leech on my penis, about as big as my thumb, almost as bad as big as my penis too. And anyway, so I had to get rid of that. Then I had all this, because it kept bleeding then, and you can't put a tight bandage on the old fella, so it'll cut the circulation. So I bandaged it up lightly, and I had this big blood patch on me here, and I had a crook back, and the pack had been digging in. I'd got this pack with a steel frame, so everything was going wrong. And I felt, well, if this is Viet Nam, I'm not going to last too long. I shot at yesterday, pack dropped on me, a harness dropped on me yesterday, lost yesterday, this morning, right, and we're still lost. Anyhow, they found us, and we got back to the unit, and back to, the next day, the very next day, they decided to do an attack against this bunker system, and they got 2 or 3 companies and the Kiwis and another unit, and they're all lining up. They're going to do a big charge down this hill and clean them out. And we got all the medical gear ready, intravenous drips and stretchers. We thought there was going to be a lot of casualties. And the artillery was firing over the top, and the jets were dropping bombs, and all happening, a couple of 100 yards in front of us. And the shells were coming over the top. I was sitting under a tree having a smoke, and there was a tree about a foot through, I suppose, and it was dead, just a dead tree, and probably 20 or 30 feet high. And one of the shells hit the top of it and snapped it off at the base, and it started to fall, and I crawled away, and the tree sort of fell right alongside me. It nearly cleaned me up. I thought, I'm really not having a good time now, and I've only been in country a couple of weeks, and only on this operation about 4 days. This is not real good. So, but I survived that and put my glasses back on, and the attack went in. The enemy weren't there, so we didn't have the casualties, and we went back to Nui Dat. So
That's an amazing first 48 hours.
that's the first chapter in my book. I call it First Contact. So my first actual getting shot at.
How that night that you were there with the Kiwis, over the course of the night, did you sleep? And if not, what happened?
Yeah, I must have slept. Yeah. So well, they're here. They're looking after us, and they're taking care of us. I'm just a medic. That was my thoughts. I'm just a medic. I'll curl up here and have something to eat and go to sleep and get up early and hope they don't find us in the night.
And did you relay that you'd only been there a few days?
No. It seemed like, at that stage, it probably seemed like months already. Time, each day was a week long.
And did you tell them about the leech?
Oh, they saw it, some of them. So, we're not touching that. You look after yourself.
Did that affect you in any other way?
No.
Just lost a lot of blood. And
Yeah.
it's a very uncomfortable
And a bit of dignity.
concept, yes.
It makes interesting reading.
So what happened after that?
Went back to Nui Dat, and probably had a week, maybe 10 days at Nui Dat, and there was the province that we were in, Phuoc Tuy province, was the one that Australians were supposed to be pacifying and looking after. That was pretty quiet. So they said, righto, we'll send 4 battalion up to Bien Hoa province, and you can camp on this little hill, fire support base Concord, and we'll send patrols out from there, because the VC are going to launch these massive rocket attacks against the airfields and base camps, and we estimate that there are, I think, 30,000 VC coming down. I thought, truth. Okay, so nothing much is happening here, apart from trees and harnesses and things happening. Right, so they're going to send us where it's really happening. Okay. So anyway, they helicoptered us into this little bare hill, and we were going to stay there, I think, 10 or 12, 14 days, something like that. and so we had to get an RAP dug out of the hard rock and soil. So they helicoptered a bulldozer in, or drove it in. Little bulldozer got there, so I dug this big pit for us, and we had to roof it and sandbag it, and kept us busy getting suntans and blisters and different sort of stuff. Our first casualty happened, I think, probably the first day or second day. Delta Company once again out on patrol, found some VC on a creek bank, shot him up a bit, and this bloke, one bloke stood up to get a better look and got shot through the chest and killed. So that was our first death. And another bloke in the contact got shot through the knee. So the knee shot fellow got helicoptered into where we were, and we didn't know what was happening. Helicopter landed, medics out to the chopper. So another medic and myself ran over to the chopper, kept our heads down, took our hats off, and this bloke's sitting on the edge of the helicopter, and I said, what's going on? He said, I've been shot through the knee. Oh, okay. So we gave him a chairlift all the way back to nearly broke our backs, getting him back to the RAP. And it was just very neat, a neat hole in and a neat hole out through the front of the knee and out the back. So we just put another bandage on it, put him back on the helicopter and off to hospital. So, that was easy.
How is it possible to have a neat bullet hole? Isn't it ripping through?
Well, it's spinning, and it must have been fired from very close quarters, probably maybe here to the doorway. And the knee bone is fairly soft, I think, and it just remained stable all the way through. It's just like someone got a drill and went zip, zip through. It was just leaking the joint fluid, synovial fluid.
So not even much blood?
No blood, yeah.
Because it didn't hit any veins or anything?
No. So just this synovial fluid, yellowy stuff oozing out there.
How did you respond to that situation?
I was thinking, oh, poor buggy, he'd been shot through the knee, and he was saying, oh, my mate's been killed, my mate Stewie's been killed. Oh, we said, with your knee, how do you feel? Oh, no, my mate. Yeah, we only had him for half an hour, I suppose, patched him up, back on the chopper and away.
Was he, do you think he was shocked? And
Probably shocked, yeah. Seeing someone killed, probably right next to him.
And was he talking about what the situation that had happened there?
He said they were throwing grenades in the creek, and he thinks the VC dived in underwater and got through probably a trapdoor or something. They used to have them, and they had no results. So one killed, one wounded, and no bodies to count to sort of balance it, which is, yeah.
The VC had taken their bodies out?
Or they'd gone, yeah. Or they hadn't been killed even, they just escaped,
And what happened to the body in that case?
That body would have been taken to the hospital and then in the morgue and then cleaned up and then sent home.
Did the bodies come through to you at all?
No.
No.
We handled them later on, when I was in contacts. We handled them and wrapped them up and put them into the choppers and put them on winches and so on. Yeah.
So how did you deal with the growing conflicts that you were starting to see? How do you think you adjusted?
I was pretty worried there at Concord because I'd heard that there was 30,000 NVA coming down and so many from this direction. I thought, there's only 100 of us on this little hill with American artillery there, and they were pretty hopeless. And the patrols out, a couple of kilometres out, what happens if we get attacked? They're not going to be able to get here. But luckily, that didn't eventuate. Yeah.
So with all that buzzing around in your head, what were the effects? Did you not sleep, or how did you deal with it?
Oh, I slept because you're tired, and you think you don't sleep well. You're always stale when you get up. You never wake up fresh. Of course, then you have your first cigarette, you shave, have your second cigarette, then you go have some breakfast and have another cigarette. And
could you hear the conflict from where you were?
we could hear the odd bit of action, yeah, and we had American guns with us. They were big tanks with guns mounted on them, big artillery pieces, and every now and again they'd fire off into the distance, and and you think, right, someone's copping it out there, or and you'd hear the odd machine gun, and boom, from a couple of kilometres away, but nothing much around where we were. We were pretty safe. Yeah. Although through binoculars one night, or some special scope that the Yanks had, they could see this group of people with what looked like a rocket heading off somewhere. Luckily it wasn't coming into us.
Did you think when you first patched up the guy with the knee, did you think he should have been taken out of the conflict? Because he was sent back, wasn't he?
No, he was sent back to the hospital.
Oh, he was sent to the hospital.
I don't know what
Right,
happened
right.
after that
Okay.
to him. Maybe home, or maybe back in. That's the thing, you never got follow-up, feedback. Then we got a snake bite fellow, bitten. Who was he bitten? I forget now. Anyway, this bloke was bitten by a snake at night, and his mates brought him down to our RAP, and we thought, oh, snake bites, truth, yeah. Oh. And the day before, this American cook from the tank battery had come in, and he'd cut his hand from fingertip down to the wrist. He's really slashed it open on a big fruit tin lid. And I put 16 stitches in. Festus McAteer was his name. And he had a real sing-song accent from Georgia. And yeah, it was good practice. But every day I used to bring a bag full of apples, green apples, and a bottle of moonshine that his folks used to send him in the mail, and he'd give that to the doctor. So anyhow, we had this snake bite, and we said to the doc, snake bite, doc, what do we do? And he was half stonkered on moonshine, so he was useless. And he said, he's going to die. Oh, shit. So anyway, we wrapped this bloke up and just got a helicopter and put him on the chopper and off to hospital, which was only 10 minutes away. So rather than us do the slashing and sucking and Condy's crystals trick. But he was okay. He was quite cool, calm and collected. He had the dead snake in a plastic bag in one hand, and there was a pit viper. I thought they were called pit vipers because they live in bunkers and pits, but it's because of the pits behind their eyes, which are their sensory organs. Found out later, and they can be deadly, but all these were old bunkers from previous occupation, and they're full of rats and snakes and things.
From that little hill, can you describe what you could see and what the setup was around you?
Nearby, or say half a kilometre away, was another little hill with a bit of trees on it. Ours was barren, and the rest was just foliage. Kilometres and kilometres of foliage, and probably light jungle. Nothing else.
And what was your immediate camp setup?
We had our RAP pit, which we used to live down, and we made beds out of ammunition boxes, and the roof used to creak because we put all these sandbags on top, about 1 metre thick, to stop mortar blasts, and we didn't know it was going to cave in or not. You could hear it creaking and groaning.
So you lived and worked down there?
You lived and worked down there, yeah. And nearby was the signals area, the command post, where they had their maps and plotting boards and radio sets, and they coordinated everything from down there. All the brass were down there. And funny thing was, around the camp you have toilet blocks and you have a pissophone, which is a pit with rocks or sand in it and oil and a tube coming out which you pee into, and it sort of gets down there and it disappears and stinks after a couple of weeks. But the command post had air vents which were made out of the same shell casings, and some blokes used to go and use them. So the officers down below got the odd golden shower there.
It's a great story.
And then there was the cookhouse and other things, just these little buildings on there, and the Yanks and tents, and right around the perimeter was the company, I think it was Charlie Company, that were our security party at that stage. Yeah.
So if you were under the impression that there were 30,000 VC or
NVA,
enemy or NVA on the other side or around you, what was the point of you being there? What was the tactic?
We were out there to harass them and then to interdict them. Our companies would be out there with either company or platoon patrols and ambushes spread right out, so that if a whole mob of them came through, they would be observed, and then artillery and jets and whatever could be put in on them and eliminate them. So sort of early warning and protection for the airfields. So if we weren't there, they could just come in and sneak in and do their stuff and go home again.
And was there any briefing prior to going to that about how it would come together?
No, just the day you'd hear the day before the operation. We're flying up to Concord. The companies will be patrolling, and we believe that. Actually, we didn't find out a lot of detail until we got there, and I maintained a diary at that stage because I was the RAP representative at the orders groups, O groups. So I'd go to the O group, the RSM would run the O group, and he'd give all this information to the SIGs, the medics, the hygiene bloke and drivers and so on, and they would take it back to their units. So I'd have to keep a diary so I'd get it right. And I kept a diary for that couple of weeks and took it back. And you'd hear all these fantastic figures, and that Charlie, or one of our companies, had an attack the other day and got these results, and there was a sampan ambushed in the river and 6 killed and no friendlies killed, and the rubbish dumpers, the locals are raiding the rubbish dump, and it's not to be encouraged, and there are prostitutes working down there at the rubbish dump, and they are not to be made available. Yeah, and so on, all this stuff, housekeeping, and they'll be able to have showers tonight for this group of people, and we're not allowed to use that water in that water bladder because it's got diesel contamination, and the picket tonight will be the SIGs, and tomorrow night will be the RAP, and if anyone wants to order cigarettes or soft drinks, please let so-and-so know. All this housekeeping stuff. Yeah. But then there's all these enemy out there, and you think, oh yeah, we're ordering soft drinks and smokes, and there's a knock shop down there at the dump, and
Were there any villages or locals around where you were on that hill?
You're probably a kilometre or two away, but we couldn't see it from where we were. But they'd obviously come in and scrounge. My mate's got a whole chapter in the book about the scrounging at the dump and how he had to stop a Yank from shooting at him to get him off the back of the truck from getting the slops to take home. Desperate people.
So apart from after the Viper, what happened while you were there?
Not much. It was pretty quiet after that. I stitched up Festus. We had the bloke shot through the knee, the snake bite. Lots of minor stuff, sunburn, rashes. We played volleyball against the Yanks and got beaten because they were a team, we were a rabble. But the Yanks were in the same camp, and we would, at sundown, we would all get our rifles and our webbing on and do a stand to, and look out and observe, and then put the sentries out and quietly, no lights, pitch dark. Their end of the camp was fluoro lights, radios going, jukebox going, and they're coming around taking photos of us, with their camera flashes. Different technique. Yeah, they were saying, we're here, come and get us. And we're saying, you come and find us and we'll fix you up. Different techniques.
So what happened after that?
Oh, there was another little episode there. The doc and I and another medic took time off one day to go to the city there, Bin Wah City, to visit the hospital where an Australian medical team were working, and we met Australian nurses and doctors, and that was just a great day. And we went for a swim in a pool at a sports club somewhere, and I had my wallet pinched. And we bought fresh bread rolls and come back to, but it was a day out, and and there's a war going on, and you can go for a swim in a sports club. And
how long would it drive? How long would it take to drive to the city?
Oh, 5-10 minutes. Yeah. So,
from the hill.
Yeah.
So there's this
to
whole
the city, and then there's
happening.
patches of jungle and probably paddy fields that we couldn't see from there, and we were sort of part of the perimeter defence of that city and airfield. Yeah. And there were Yankee units and probably Thais and Koreans and so on, all with their allocated area around that, and probably 50,000 Yanks.
But you said when you first landed in Saigon, there was a lot of confusion about who the people were. You saw a lot of people in black jumpsuits. And when you got to that city, were you still feeling that confusion?
No, the confusion died down after you talked to people and observed, like driving from Nui Dat to Vung Tau, 30 kilometres. You could see farmers in black pyjamas and people walking down the street in black pyjamas, you know. The black pyjamas was something that grew out of the local VC just wearing their ordinary clothes into battle, whereas the NVA and the regulars wore green or blue or grey, or you know, and had pith helmets and proper uniforms and badges of rank and decent weapons and so on. Whereas the local bloke who was in the militia, he was just in his everyday black clothes. Which has gradually changed over time. Nowadays they wear all sorts of colours.
So how did you come to leave the hill? Why did they leave?
The action that they thought was going to happen, the troop movements didn't happen. False or incorrect intelligence. So they just said, righto, tomorrow we're packing up all the gear, and I think it was 10 or 14 days that we were there, and pack up all the gear. The helicopters will pick us up at 0900 and we're going back to Nui Dat. Righto, pack the gear up and back to the Dat, and a few more days off. And
what would you do on days off in Nui Dat?
well, first thing when you get back from an operation, you've got to clean your rifle, or you clean it twice a day anyway, but you give you thorough rifle cleaning, wash all your clothes, repack, empty your pack out, wash your pack, just refresh all your gear, and go and have a couple of beers and make the head spin with 2 beers after none for a couple of weeks.
Okay. As a medic in the front line in Vietnam, what were you carrying?
About 30 kilos plus of equipment in packs. I had an Armalite rifle, 100 rounds of ammunition. I was supposed to have 2 grenades in a basic pouch, but I carried a camera instead, figuring if things got that crook, the 2 grenades would be pretty useless. Sometimes I carried a claymore mine, a shovel, 5 water bottles, each with 1 litre in them, a couple of steel mugs, one for shaving, one for drinking and cooking in, a small stove, a rope, a machete, 5 days rations, a small tent, a ground sheet to sleep on, which is just a sheet of plastic basically, a silk, which is like a liner, a sleeping bag liner to curl up in, a medical kit of course, packed with enough equipment to look after about 100 men in the field for a short length of time before resupply came in. A sweat rag, a hat, camouflage cream to put cream on every morning after shaving, green and black, and put on properly. Spare pair of socks, sometimes a spare shirt, and mosquito net, some twine to tie things to trees, and that's about it. There's a big pack on the back and a bum pack sitting underneath, and a web belt with a couple of water bottles and a couple of pouches on it. So that's roughly the gear that I carried. Fair weight.
Can you tell us what was in the medical equipment?
The medical kit had syrettes of morphine, several of those. Each person on their rifle had taped a shell dressing, or in their top left pocket. I had tubes of antifungal cream, vials of antibiotic powders that you could mix sterile water with, which were in other vials, and syringes and needles, scalpels, scissors, probes and forceps. Just about everything I could think of that I would need in the field, and I probably carried far too much. The bag was chock-a-block. But the only things I ever ran out of were shell dressings, and my hoochie mate Willie, the turd burglar, hygiene man, he used to carry a spare satchel of shell dressings after our first big action when we ran out and had to get them thrown into our position from diggers on the perimeter. So shell dressings are fairly bulky.
Can you tell us about teaming up with your hoochie mate? How did that work? What was...
Everybody in the company teamed up with somebody else. The officer had the batman who dug their pit and cooked their meals and looked after them, protected them, and everybody else worked in tandem with somebody else. For safety, I suppose. Our sleeping pits were about 2 metres apart, so we could, if there was an action happening, we could talk to each other and see what was going on. Just mutual protection.
And how was it decided who would team up with who?
I guess mates in sections used to organise themselves, but at my level I was instructed to, you will go there, you are in that position, he is your hoochie mate. And so Willie copped me and I copped Willie. I haven't seen him since. Must have been something I said.
And his nickname was the...
Turd burglar.
And how did he get that?
Because he dug the toilet pit wherever we stopped for any length of time, and he'd dig a little trench, get a fork stick, stick a toilet roll on it with a plastic cover over it, and leave his shovel over there, and that was his little job, apart from doing pickets and carrying extra shell dressings. Pretty laid back sort of a lad, Willie.
And how did you two get on?
Good, yeah. No problem at all.
And were there times when you had to really give support to one another that was really crucial?
The only real time was when Willie had the bag of shell dressings and I was in a big action, and I walked past him and he gave them to me and said, "See you later," and gave me that look that said, "Rather you than me," because it was all happening up the front and he didn't have to go up, but I did.
So this was with B Company that you were teamed up? Okay, so it was a few months before you actually were assigned to B Company, is that right? Or you were in...
Yeah, we had the action where the doctor and I got lost and all the other things happened with the Kiwis. Back to camp, and then the next operation, we were helicoptered out once again onto a little hilltop called Nui Nei, which is not far from Nui Dat. And the RSM, the grumpy, red-faced, curly-moustached RSM, ex-Pommy Army, instructed everybody as they got off the chopper, "You will go there, you will go there, and you, Corporal Brown, you will dig in there." And he pointed to a spot that was just about solid rock and instructed me to dig in. So I hopped into it with my shovel, took my shirt off and all the gear, and dug this pit which had a big boulder in the middle, and I rolled the boulder out to one side so I didn't kill anybody down below me. And I just finished digging the pit and was having a smoke. And the word passed down to me that, "Corporal Brown, pack up your gear, you're going to B Company." And I thought someone was having a lend of me, but they weren't, so I had to pack my gear up, climb to the top of the hill, get in a little 2-seater chopper and buzz off out to the jungle and link up with B Company. Apparently their medic had suffered heat exhaustion and had been choppered out previously, and I was his replacement. I said, "Oh well, he'll come back in a couple of days and I'll go back to the RAP with the doctor, back to square one." But I spent the next 6 months with B Company. I was a spare medic at the RAP.
Spare medic at the RAP.
Yep. Not bad job.
And while you were doing that, what was the sort of daily routine like?
Sick parade at the RAP was pretty big. We get all the odds and ends from among the companies, would all sit outside in the waiting room, and the doctor would see the new patients, and what he used to do was to poke his head out through the louver window and yell out, "Next one with a clap," and it was just his little joke. And they would come in and someone would come in and say, "I haven't got the clap, sir, or got crook leg or something," and he'd check them out and refer them on to the medics who were loitering out there, and we would do the treatments, or we'd be doing treatments on regular maintenance people that didn't need to come and see him again. But anything and everything, from rashes to burns to cuts and bruises, hangovers, flu, malaria, VD, Had a fair bit of ED there. We had a scoreboard, it was like a whiteboard in the office, and we had casualties and a column for VD. And I think out of about 1,000 men, we had 350 cases. But one particular fellow, I was led to believe, had it 32 times. So that sort of cut the number of fellows who had it right down. His statistics sort of blew it out somewhat. But he was reputed to have been a driver and taken the laundry into Berea every day and stopped off for other things than laundry, other pressing engagements.
Did you know him?
No, just of him. Reputations.
Were there many people who had it repeatedly?
Yes, I think some did not take any precautions and therefore were more susceptible. They get drunk, go to town, not shower, not do the procedures, not wear a condom, all that sort of thing, and they were probably more likely to reoffend.
So when you talk about going into town, you're talking about going into Vung Tau?
Well, basically going down to the Badco Club, which was at the back of the hospital, and when the company would go down as a company, we'd drive down in trucks and pull up at the Badco Club, hand in our rifles to be locked up, go and get changed into our civvies, hang around the Badco Club until I think 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and then a truck would go into town or two, and you'd have to be back by 9. So you had 4 hours to go into town, do a bit of shopping, go to the bars, get a haircut, all that sort of thing. So most of the time was spent at the Badco Club, the Harold Holt swimming pool, at the bar there, which was good. You had snacks and chips and lots of cold beer, Australian beer. You go down the beach, have a surf. I think they had a boat there that some people could water ski behind. Sit around with your mates and just switch off, try to switch off. No weapons, no responsibilities. Take your malaria pills, have a good feed, go and visit your mates in the hospital, visit Johnny Hector.
Can you describe the Badco Club for us?
Badco Club was like a big bar and a small eatery. That was the sort of day area, and had all these stack of chairs, steel stack of chairs outside, and then the pool and the accommodation. I think was 2-storey basic rectangular buildings with stairs and showers and toilet block, and the mess hut I think was next door, just a basic big open area with tables and chairs. But it was secure, and there used to be cleaning ladies come in and make your beds and sweep the floor and do all that sort of thing, and they'd come in first thing in the morning and there'd be naked blokes and drunk fellows, and but they didn't take any notice. And
So what sort of role do you think alcohol had in that situation? In that, why were people drinking so much?
it was something to do, and it was a release from. It disinhibited people, and they could talk and do whatever they liked, and just release them from the horror, I think, that some of them had seen, and to them, a lot of them, it became normal to get sloshed regularly, and some of them would even fill their water bottles to take neat alcohol out into the bush instead of water, and probably didn't have a very good effect on their performance.
They took alcohol out on patrol.
I found out a lot later. I didn't know at the time. I was just green as grass then, didn't know a thing.
Sure.
And I used to make them fight a lot too, amongst themselves. We didn't need the enemy, just fill the boys full of grog, and they could throw these steel beer cans at each other, open up nasty head gashes and get me to stitch them up without anaesthetic.
Where were those fights happening?
Usually at Nui Dat, but occasionally at Vung Tau. Yeah, rival platoons and rival sections, just people rub each other up the wrong way. Or
So big fights, you're talking about?
fist fights, yeah.
But I mean large groups of people.
No, usually just a few, yeah.
Okay.
And up in Nui Dat, after I came home, I believe there was a shoot up there amongst our fellows. Someone had said the wrong thing to another bloke, and he disputed it and went and got his rifle, shot the camp up.
So while you were there, though, at the RAP, you actually, how frequently would you have to treat someone who'd been injured in a fight?
Usually I do this in my aid posts. When I became a B Company medic, this is a bit later on, they might wake me up at 1 or 2 in the morning. They were still boozing up behind the line somewhere, and they'd decide to throw a few cans around, and they'd come and wake me up. Hey, Sam, you can stitch this bloke up, and maybe only 4 or 5 times altogether, but it seemed like a lot when you're woken up in the middle of the night.
So before you actually joined B Company, you were talking about the various types of things that you were treating, and we were talking about VD before. What about malaria? What sort of incidence was there?
We had a big malaria blitz, I think about September. Just about everyone was coming down with it, and a fair percentage of the battalion suffered from it at the one time. It depended on which areas of operation we were in, and the enemy were basically giving the mosquitoes the malaria to give to us without us knowing. We were operating in the enemy area, so the mosquitoes didn't care who they bit. And the safeguards we were taking weren't really working, the Aerogard type stuff, and they weren't supposed to bite through the Australian cotton shirts, but they did. You'd be sitting on picket at night and you'd be feeling the zing, zing, zing in your back, and just hundreds of them feeding on you, and you could hear the whole thing was just buzzing. So malaria was pretty bad. We had blokes all over the RAP floor on stretchers. The hospitals were full, and that's when they decided to bring in an extra preventive medication called dapsone, which is actually for leprosy, and we were fed that as well as Paliodrin, the regular anti-malarial, and then found out later that lots of blokes got crook from the dapsone. There was a syndrome that you get from the dapsone, a blood disorder which should have been tested for and wasn't.
And how did that manifest itself? In what symptoms?
Another fever, yeah. I used to see these blokes in the bush, and they'd have this massive fever, and you couldn't really work out what it was without blood tests or anything, so I just put pyrexia of unknown origin, PUO, on their medical slip, put them in a helicopter and get them off to hospital, and they were probably treated for a fever without the doctors knowing what it was. Only later, when you read books and research and secret information is released after 30 years, that you find out these things, what it could well have been. And I think I probably had it myself.
So the Paliodrin up until then wasn't actually sufficient to stop the malaria?
It works against one type of malaria, but there are 2 main types, falciparum and vivax, and it was treating one and not the other, and our leaders were saying, the blokes aren't taking their pills, make sure they observe taking the pills twice a day, and we'd say, swallow the pills and get ticked off in the bush too, naughty boys not taking the pills, and blokes were still getting malaria. So they worked out finally that it was a different type, and a resistant type.
So you actually said that at one point most of the battalion came down with malaria.
I wouldn't say most. I should retract that. That's a fair percentage, maybe a third, which is a lot.
And you had people lying all over the place.
Oh yeah, vomiting and fever, and they're just out of it for a week to 10 days. Then they come good again.
So unable to function.
Yeah.
So how was the medical operations able to deal with that many people being sick at one time?
It was spread out over, say, a month. So we managed, but only barely. We all had to learn how to drive the ambulance. Had to do a driver's test on the wrong side of the road with left hand, this and that. There wasn't much happening operationally then because of the malaria. So it was really a flat time, but we were flat out, just doing maintenance. And the enemy probably had malaria all the time, but in a background situation, because we were new to it, and it affected us pretty badly.
And what other serious illnesses were occurring due to the conditions that people were operating in?
Heat exhaustion was not common, but it happened, and people from other battalions died from it. And one of the tracker dogs died from heat exhaustion, the only dog casualty. A lot of rashes, tinea, all these unusual fevers, could be put down to anything. I was chopped off to hospital late in the piece with possible appendicitis, and I was in that much pain the doctor actually gave me intravenous morphine and put me on cloud 9 and helicoptered into hospital, and they shaved me from nipple to knee, put the glove on and put the finger where you don't like fingers being put, and the doctor didn't operate. He said, we'll wait till tomorrow, and it settled down overnight, and it was an inflammation of all my lymph nodes in my gut. So they'd all flared up at once, and looking back on it, it was probably to do with the dapsone. And I had a digger the day before that I'd sent to hospital with the same thing. Just sheer agony, can't do a thing, just rolling around in the dirt. And but anyway, came good, and I went home a week later.
And when people were sick with malaria, how were they treated?
Usually sent down to hospital, just bed rest, lots of liquids and medication.
And just waiting for it to pass.
Yeah, come good. Then they had a rest and convalescence centre down there where they'd send a batch of blokes that were recuperating, and they would have several days there to build up again, and probably drink too much grog, and then come back to Nuidat and go back to work.
So when you joined, you suddenly sent off to B Company. Can you tell us about arriving? You actually were chopped into the jungle.
Chop it into this little clearing in the jungle, all hot and sweaty from digging in on Nui Ne. And there's a small group of men there, and one of them come over to me. He was the captain, the second in charge, and he said, where's your camouflage cream? I said, oh, thank you very much. I said, I don't have any, sir, having just come from over there where you don't need it. And he said, he got his out and he said, use mine. So I put black and green on and rubbed it around a bit. And he said, you'll be travelling behind the SIG. And they'd apparently been waiting for me to take off and march onto this objective next morning. They were going to do a surprise attack on a hill called Nui Nan in the morning. It was a new innovation, a night movement, and this was getting late in the day, and I'd been holding them up. So I got in the line and plodded along after the SIG, and we pulled up for a smoke probably an hour or two later, and he said, I said, what's going on? He said, oh, Lecky was chopped out with heat exhaustion, and you're his replacement. I said, oh, thanks very much, now I know. Right, then I thought I'll be here for a couple of days and he'll be back, I'll be gone. So we marched all night in the dark, terrible thing, crashing and crunching and, you know, making lots of noise, sort of telling any enemy exactly where we were, bad move. And we pulled up before this little hill in the morning, and it had been raining, and it was really steep and slippery with red mud and clay, and we slipped and slithered and fooled around and finally got to the top, and luckily no one was there, otherwise we would have been slaughtered. So then we got off of that, and
what was the purpose behind going in
intelligence had indicated that there was possible enemy on top of this little hill. There's nothing there at all. A little bit of broken crockery from probably 50 years ago was all that I could find.
But were you feeling quite vulnerable and marching through the night and approaching the hill?
Yeah, I was tired, and from the day before, and wondering, this is B Company. I've been with them before, but this is Viet Nam now, and heck, what does a company medic do when he's responsible for the lot? And the gear I had wasn't the gear that he took his gear with him, and I was lost. And then I had to organise the pickets at night for company headquarters at my job, and a few other little things that was suddenly my responsibility that I wasn't used to.
So you got to the top of the hill and there was nothing
Got to the top of the hill, nothing there. And 2 days later, I was still with B Company, thinking, oh well, I'll be going back soon. Don will be back. And we were in a patch of jungle. We'd moved on, and Charlie Company had gone over here, we'd gone there, Delta Company had gone here, Whiskey was over here, and Victor was back with battalion headquarters. And going through the jungle looking for the enemy, not much happening, and suddenly we could hear firing about 400 metres away, lots and lots of shooting. And Charlie Company had sent a patrol out and had been going most of the day. This is about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They'd been going all day following a track, and it kept on luring them further and further on because they might find something. they were sort of too far from their base to return when they came across a bunker complex, and they walked into the bunker complex and there were empty bunkers, and I thought, oh, this is empty, and they probably relaxed a little bit, and then suddenly they were fired on. Well, they saw a sentry sitting on one of the bunkers, and the sentry saw them at the same time, so they shot at each other. Everyone went to ground, and big firefight developed. But the enemy were in the bunkers, so all they had was their sort of eyebrows showing and their rifles, and these diggers were out in the open. And before too long, there were 2 of them dead and 6 or 7 wounded, and 1 enemy dead because everyone was shooting at him because he died and sort of his body hung out of the pit of it. And we were 400 yards away listening to all of this, and it happened over probably an hour and a half, and they didn't want any help. No, we're right, it's only a small enemy group, 3 or 4 people, and there's 18 of us. Suddenly they had 2 dead and 7 wounded, so half of them were out of action. So they had 9 against 2 or 3 in bunkers, and it was starting to get dark, and then they said, yes, we do need help, our radios have been shot out, we really need help. The lieutenant's got 3 holes in him, or 2 holes in him at that stage, and so then they organised a patrol of our people and me, being their medic had been shot through the neck, so they didn't have a medic. And we almost galloped the 400 metres in a semicircle to come around on the side of the action and link up with them. And I remember seeing a bloke laying behind a tree there with his rifle pointing away from us, and he sort of quickly looked over his shoulder and saw it was us friendly people, thinking maybe it was the enemy coming around behind. And he saw us and I went over and said, where's the enemy? Where's the wounded? And he said, oh, over there. And about 15, 20 metres away, behind a big tree, I could see 2 blokes kneeling over another fella, and he was obviously pretty bad. And there was no shooting at this stage. It had stopped about 10 or 15 minutes before. Anyway, I said, righto, thanks, mate. And he sort of got down and had the big wide-eyed look, and I could see a few other people around the place. And I started sauntering over to where they were. And as I was halfway across there, the shooting started again from the bunkers, which were about 8 metres that way. And they missed me. And I got behind the tree, and it went on for about another half an hour. Everyone started shooting again, and the officer got shot in the bum again, and it was all happening. So I got down behind the tree, and this bloke had been shot through both arms and through the right nipple and blew out his shoulder. That was, I'd seen the Kiwi. That was pretty bad, but this bloke was in a fair bit of pain, and chest wound. I thought, chest wound, no morphine, head wound, no morphine. Oh, but he was really out of it, so I had to give him morphine and try and patch him up while laying on the ground next to him with his two blokes there almost crying their eyes out, and the shooting happening and shooting into the tree we were behind. And anyway, the enemy starting to get dark then. I think the enemy sort of went down a little tunnel and ran away, and our blokes sort of took over and so on. And patched him up a bit more. Then I had to get the fellas to make stretchers. My medical training thought, what do we need now? Stretchers. Yeah, stretchers, right. So I yelled out, make some stretchers. We'll need 7 stretchers. And the voice come back, how do we make stretchers? Chop down 2 saplings, get your toggle ropes, get your hoochies, and make, oh, righto, yeah. They'd made them before, but they were all, they'd gone blank. So they were making stretchers, and a couple of stretcher bearers had come in with me on the rescue mission, and they were patching blokes up, and they're blokes with neck wounds and cheek wounds and so on, and some minor wounds. One bloke just had a nick on his wrist where he'd put his hand around the tree to shoot, and they'd shot through the wrist. Oh, he's going to throw a grenade, that's right. Put his hand around the tree and bing. So it was still getting dark then, slowly. Gone quiet, but we couldn't winch them out. We couldn't get a chopper in there. So we had to stretcher them all the way back to where we'd started from, 400 metres away. And by then it was pitch dark, and we had to go in between the saplings with the stretchers because they were all pretty awkward. And I got an ex-lifesaver to do mouth-to-mouth on this fellow because he was not breathing then. and I had a little pen light torch, and I'd go up to each of the wounded and see how they were going, and move between patients on the march. And about 9 o'clock that night, we got back to our position. This bloke was still barely alive, and the helicopter was hovering about 60 feet up, dropped a cable down, and we put one on at a time, the worst first, and get them up into the chopper, and took 2 or 3 up, and he went off to the hospital, and another chopper came in and slotted in and got the next slot in, and finally we strapped the dead on and got them away. But the last bloke, he'd been shot through the forehead and blew the back of his head out. So as I was lifting him onto the jungle penetrator and strapping him on, I got all his brains and stuff on my shirt, and I had that for a week until I got a clean shirt brought out. So that was my introduction to B Company, and I thought, I'm not going to last too long in this sort of stuff. But it did settle down a bit after that. Yeah, so that was Black Friday, Friday the 13th of September 1968. And so then the choppers all pulled away, then there was dead silence, and my night vision was never good, and I had glasses, and I was sort of fumbling around. A bloke grabbed me by the arm and he said, I'll show you where your bunk is, Sam, and where your shell scrape is, Sam, and you don't have to do picket tonight. Thanks very much. So he led me to my pit, and I sat down with my feet in the pit, and I sat on the edge, and I thought, whew, that was some sort of action. Then I was pretty hungry because I'd missed out on tea. So I got rattled around in my ration pack quietly, got a tin of something out, opened it, did it all by feel, ate it. I think it was cold pork and stuff. It was really, really solid, and it sat there like a lead balloon all night. And I just couldn't sleep. I was sitting there propped against a tree. I was bilious. I had all these flashbacks. I was reliving the action over and over again. What else could I have done? What could I have done differently? And so on. Just thinking, struth. And we didn't know at that stage that the last bloke that I'd patched up, he died on the chopper. So he didn't make it. So they had 3 dead and 6 wounded. Yeah.
A tough day.
Yeah, tough day at the office. Yeah.
So just to go back into that story a little bit, and just to ask you a little bit more detail, although that you've told that story incredibly well. When you said that they said that their radios had been shot out, how were you communicating with them?
Well, they had one going most of the time, but they usually have 2 or 3 radios, and I think a couple of them had been shot out or flat battery or something. But they were they couldn't get direct communications to where they needed them, so they were relaying back through B Company. So all the messages took longer, and finally, luckily, they said we really do need help, and we were there within. It's almost gallop through the bush, which you don't do over there. You go very carefully in case you get ambushed and shot up. And but we knew the desperation. I didn't realise how many casualties they had. We just knew they needed help. And until we got there, we didn't know the extent. So next day there were 9 left out of 18.
When you started hearing the firing, you were about 400 metres away.
About 400 metres away, and you could hear it through the bush. And you're thinking, gee, I wonder who's copping it. And after several minutes, the word whispers came around, because we talked in whispers. We had a very good routine there. Charlie Company. Oh, right, Charlie Company's in action, and you don't know whether they're copping it or whether they're giving it. And you assume they're giving it and they're okay. And then you think, gee, I wonder how the medic's coping if he's got casualties. I always used to think, if that were me there, how would I be going? It sounded pretty bad. And the medic had already been shot through the neck. And
when you say he was shot through the neck, was he killed?
No, just badly wounded. The cheek and the neck sort of through here. Yeah, and another bloke, I think, through the cheek and jawbone, and lots of blood and gore. And
who was running things with you at that point? Was it the commander of the B Company?
No, he stayed back at our camp, and he sent out a lieutenant with a platoon, 30 men, and the CSM went as well. So we had a fair covering of people there. The lieutenant who did actually conduct the rescue mission got a mention in dispatches for that action.
So he was the guy who was giving orders for
Yeah.
you?
I didn't actually get any orders, I just went in. They just said, pack your gear up, we're going to rescue, or going out to help Charlie Company. Yeah, righto. So I put my gear on and away I went, and I don't think I spoke to anybody until we got, about anything much, until I ordered them to get the stretchers made, and I asked around for a mouth-to-mouth person. And then we got back and were winching them out, and our captain wanted to know what the priority was and how many we had. And at that stage I thought we only had 2 dead and 6 wounded. And I said, oh, we've got so many. And then right at the last, this bloke come up and said, oh, I've been wounded in the ankles. He had shrapnel in his ankles. And he found out later he had them in his scalp too, when they all festered out. He was right in the thick of it and got the Distinguished Conduct Medal.
So when you, at the point that they said, yes, we need help, you went charging around basically as fast as you could.
Yeah.
How many of you went round?
Probably about 30 odd, 35 maybe. Yeah. Not knowing the size of the enemy force or anything.
And all the time you could hear firing, gunfire.
Until we got probably halfway there, then it stopped. And we thought, oh, that's good, that's finished. And then it started again after I went across the clearing.
And when it started again, were you armed?
Yeah, I had my rifle there.
And were you ready
but I was
to
behind
fire?
the tree, and they were on my left-hand side, and I'm right-handed. So to shoot at them, I would have had to, and it was no point in me doing it because all these other fellas were shooting around us and over us, and we were behind the tree, so I just started work.
So behind the tree, what was happening?
I was just working on the patient and trying to patch him up, and dressings kept falling off, and because it was an awkward sort of situation, didn't want to restrict his breathing too much, and wanted to patch the holes, and just very, very awkward, especially laying down.
Was he up until that time? Was he the worst casualty that you'd come across?
Yeah, the Kiwi was bad with the thigh wounds. He should have died too, but with those wounds, but he lived.
So what happened after that incident?
After that, we packed up our gear. We left that bunker system. The artillery did lob in on it during that night, but it probably didn't do much damage, and the enemy probably reoccupied it. We went off patrolling in different areas. Charlie Company got reinforcements, and we had a creek crossing where one of the fellows sprained his knee and badly sprained his toes, and I thought they may have been fractured, but due to the regular contacts we had with the enemy, he was unable to be helicoptered out for 2 or 3 days. So luckily when he did get out, it was only badly sprained. I helped him with a claim not too long ago, having remembered that incident and written it up.
Was it hard to adjust to a new company?
No, I found it was fairly easy to adjust, because after my first abrupt encounter with the camouflage captain, he turned out to be a really nice fellow. He was hoochied up close by, and he was a really caring, careful. He used to coordinate everything for the company and do it quite smoothly. He was a smooth operator. Great when casualties are around, especially. And the company, everybody was friendly and helpful to me. Even the CSM, who was a tough little Scotsman, he probably thought he was pretty tough, and I thought he was tough for a while, but after a while I could see that he was just, keeping us up to the mark, keeping us all doing the right thing, and putting our camouflage cream on every morning and shaving every day, and being quiet. I remember he chipped me a couple of times because I'd souvenired a Viet Cong cooking pot and put it in my pack, and it was rattling a little bit, and he gave me a bit of a dressing down, rightly so.
What did that involve?
The cooking pot?
The dressing down.
Oh. It was sort of a harsh whisper, because in the bush we didn't talk, but a harsh whisper said, "Fix that pack or I'll fix you," sort of thing. Yes, sir. So I tried to fix it a few times and ended up stuffing a pair of socks in it. I didn't want to just leave it there. It was a great little cooking pot, a pair of black pyjamas, in a bunker that we'd sort of overrun. Souvenir.
Can you describe the bunker that you overran?
Yeah, it was around that time, or a bit later, obviously. But one of the platoon patrols had come across, they'd heard enemy talking or chopping wood or something, and they'd snuck forward to have a look, and they saw a bunker system and some enemy, and they wanted permission to go in and take them out. And our company commander, being very careful, thankfully said, no, pull back and we'll put the artillery in and then we'll all go in, the whole company. We don't want any gung-ho heroics here. So we pulled back a couple of 100 metres, the artillery bombarded it for a while, then we went in and found it all smashed up pretty well, and I went down this bunker underground and explored it a little bit. I could see all these little wires, and I thought, you bloody idiot, they could be tripwires on a mine. And I thought, well, there's a lot of them. No, it probably isn't. So I went down anyway, and I found this pair of black pyjamas and a cooking pot with a lid and a few other bits and pieces, and someone else found a bag full of medical supplies and bananas and things, and a few photos were taken, and I think that was the one that there was a black brassiere hanging on the line, the washing line, and we thought, oh, these blokes are doing all right out here. But then later on we found out that sometimes the Viet Cong women were just another one of the troops, not just entertainment corps. So yeah, quite at liberty to have their smalls hanging on the washing line. So we didn't have any action there, just probably marked the camp for future demolition by the engineers or a B-52 strike or something like that, and carried on marching and patrolling quietly with hand signals.
Do you remember the hand signals?
Yes, I remember them very well. A couple of engineers we had didn't. With a rifle company you get attachments like medics, signallers, engineers, and we had these two engineers with us one day. They were a splinter team, and they're supposed to blow up things that we find, unexploded bombs and bunkers and so on. A signal came back down the line for a signal of 10 and a tap on the foot. And for us diggers, that meant keep 10 paces apart. The thickness of the growth of the bush around here indicates that we should spread out a bit more. Rather than 5 metres, make it 10 metres, 10 paces. Righto, so blokes just unwound, and the engineers who'd been allocated the tail end Charlie position, which is right at the back, they got the signal 10, and they thought 10 minutes for a smoke. So they stopped, lit up, and had their smoke, and the rest of the patrol kept going for quite some time. And the third last bloke in the patrol kept looking back, and he suddenly thought, they're not here anymore, and he quickly sent the message back up the line, the engineers are missing. So then we had to send a party back to bring them back, and they soon learnt the correct signals. So it was sort of come to me quickly, and bring a NCO or officer or enemy, or obstacle rather, enemy, friendlies, just basic hand signals. It saved noise.
What about living conditions out there?
After each day's patrolling, about say an hour before sundown, we would stop and form a circle, a harbour, and the signal would come back, form a wagon train circle. So the CSM would allocate positions for each of our pairs, and we would put our packs down, sit there with our rifles in our laps while clearing patrols went out and cleared the area outside our camp, and then we would quietly dig in, which is pretty hard to do sometimes in rocky country. Dig our shell scrapes, have something to eat, have a cup of tea, have a smoke, and then just before dark we would put our webbing on, our rifle and hat, and we would sit there and gaze out into the jungle in case we were attacked. That was called Stand 2. The malaria pills would come around, and then during the night we would have machine guns spaced around the perimeter, and most people would do 2.5 hours during the night sitting on the gun with a companion who was overlapping their times. So someone was usually fairly alert, and sometimes we would sneak a smoke down in the bottom of the pit and hide it in our shirt or in our cupped hands, so you didn't show any light, but you could still smell the smoke. And then in the morning we would do stand to again before dawn, get the pills, shave, clean rifles. We'd do that in the evening too, clean rifles, have something to eat, pack up the gear, fill in your pit, open up any cans that you'd been getting food out of so that the enemy couldn't use them as containers for bombs and things, and do it all quietly. Put your camouflage cream on. The orders would come out for the day in quiet little O groups between sections and platoons and company headquarters. People that needed treatment for different things would come and see me, and we'd put our 30 kilos on the back and pick up our rifle and have a final smoke and head off on patrol again for the day.
And what about going to the toilet? Because I imagine if you went too far out in the bush, you'd be very vulnerable.
Within the camp, you would have the little pits for each platoon, which the turd burglars from each platoon would dig, just about 2 metres long and 30 centimetres wide, 30 centimetres deep, and a pile of dirt to put on top of, and a toilet roll in a bag, if we could get a toilet roll. Each day's rations used to have 4 little square sheets of shiny green toilet paper, which had no wipeability capabilities. That's a good one. No purchasing power. More for polishing than...
So if you'd run out of the terrible toilet paper, what
Well, you didn't actually need much toilet paper because you're on rations, which were concentrated foods, and so you didn't have much byproduct waste to dispose of.
Right, really? Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
1 litre of water a day to shave, to cook in, and to make your mug of tea. It's not very much, and you sweat a lot, so everything gets concentrated, and it's more like pellets when you do go.
And what about the food that you were eating out there? What were you eating?
Every 5 days, the helicopter would come into a clearing somewhere, and we'd send a patrol out to bring the rations in to the main party, and we get 5 days rations each. So that'd be 15 meals, and two days would be Australian packs, and they were very concentrated and didn't take much room, but pretty boring. And the Americans, each meal would be the size of a 1 day Australian pack. You had cookies and cream biscuits and chocolate coated thingos and frankfurters and lima beans and pork and tinned apples and peaches, fruit salad, 4 cigarettes in each meal pack, including Kent with the asbestos filters. So they were quite bulky. So what you would do is you'd put all your rations out on the ground and you'd sort out what you thought you could carry, and then you would destroy the rest. And we'd dig a big pit, and if the conditions were right, we'd have a little fire in there and throw the rations in there to destroy them so the enemy couldn't use them. But people get a bit blasé sometimes out in the bush, and there were little tins of Kraft cheese, and some of them wouldn't puncture them before they threw them in the fire. They thought, oh, this will be good fun. I'd throw them in the fire and they'd go, poof, and a big dollop of molten cheese would go flying, and the noise would carry, and the CSM would come around and rant and rave under his breath. It's just the wags doing their thing. And you'd get another special pack too, used to come in with that, and it used to have chewing gum, chewing tobacco, cigars, shaving cream in a pressure pack with a full menthol flavour, razor blades, Hershey bars. It was a real special pack, and you'd get that every now and again. And Marlboro cigarettes, and the boss used to get the Marlboro cigarettes first because that's what he liked, and we used to get odds and ends that were left over. Yeah.
And what about keeping clean?
You can't keep clean unless it's the wet season or unless you go through a creek and you've got time to get in and have a scrub. And I think that probably happened once or twice. Our longest operation was 54 days without a wash, and we were just going rotten crutches and armpits and everything, and rashes developing, and we were just bad news. Yeah.
That must have been harder for you because not only did you have to deal with that yourself, I guess you had to look at it all the time.
And smell it when you're fixing someone's tinea-laden feet up, or a groin or whatever, and you're putting purple cream on with a long stick.
Ew.
Yeah, a lot of medics things aren't real good, and a lot of people used to rubbish the medics, but then when it came time for treatment, well, a classic example is Big Hoss. He was a fellow about 6'2" or 3", built like a country dunny, and he came in one day. I was sitting out in the bush, I was sitting on my shell scrape. We were probably there for a couple of days, which was great. You could stay in one place and read a book, even a little book you put in your pack too. And Hoss came in with a lump in his calf, big red lump with a shiny bit. I thought, right. So I lay down here, and he's laying down on the side of the pit on the dirt, smelling. He'd probably been out for a few weeks. And I started slicing with my scalpel into this big abscess thing that he had, and squeezing it, and nothing's happening. And I'd smashed my glasses before that too. So I had one good lens with a couple of cracks on it, and one lens that just sort of shattered and fell out. So I was having a bit of fun with headaches and seeing things, and not much eye protection, and cutting a bit further into this, and he's sort of gritting his teeth and laying back, and finally the thing went boom, and it just exploded, and I got the lot, green and yellow, and in the eye and everywhere, and he sort of went, that's better. And I went, struth. And I tipped this Hibitane in, antiseptic all over me, which was pure, and my eyes just went crimson, you know. I didn't think, just thought, hell, this skunk's going to get, I'm going to get brain damage, and eyes are going to fall out and everything. And then I got water and washed it all off, and they just went light red then, and cleaned him up and gave him some antibiotics, and I thought, struth, you know. Every now and again we used to get clean greens, so we couldn't wash, but the helicopter would bring a clean set of greens in, so you'd take your old ones off, they'd go back to camp, and the bloke would take them down the laundry and get another load of the jack, and we'd get clean greens, and they'd be clean and smell good for half an hour or so, and then your body odour would sort of take over. And whatever you did there, you sweated because of the 30 kilos that you carried, the tenseness of the situation, and uphill and down dale, and the closeness of the jungle. And about that time, I had my most terrifying moment over there, which I forgot to put in my book. People usually think that it's a battle or something that, you know, when you're getting shot at, but I was in my shell scrape. Willie was about 2 metres away. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was about half a metre underground, laying on my plastic sheet with my pack as my pillow, pretty hard, and I had the mosquito net draped so that it hung down in there to keep the mosquitoes from coming in and zapping me, and it sort of just touched the ground. So I was sort of encased in this mosquito net, and suddenly I thought I was being attacked by a Viet Cong, and he was on my chest and on my face, and then he was running up and down my body, and then hissing and snarling, and I thought, well, it can't be a Viet Cong, but my ribs were barely containing my heart. It was sort of jumping and smashing against my ribs, and I didn't utter a sound, not a peep. So Willie slept through the whole thing, and it was a big monkey that had been scrounging around the camp and fallen in my pit, got under the mosquito net and was running up and down me, and every time I punched it and kicked it and everything, it would hit the mosquito net and bounce back like a trampoline. And I was just petrified of, you know, first thinking my throat was going to be cut, and then thinking this thing's going to bite me and I'm going to get rabies and that. So in the end I just had the presence of mind to lift up the mosquito net and lash out with both feet and kicked it up and out of the shell scrape, and just lay there exhausted, and heart gradually settled back to normal. And in the morning I said to Willie, did you hear what happened last night? He said, nah. So that was my worst moment over there, I thought.
Oh, that would be totally terrifying.
And we're on a slope, dug in, and as I kicked it, this monkey I could hear him go crash, bang, wallop, all the way down the slope. But I hadn't seen monkeys during the day, and it was just, you know, sudden, you know, from a deep sleep, to flat on your back to
Under that constant pressure, I mean, you'd worked in psychiatry and psychology, studied psychology. What did you see any evidence of people starting to really lose it?
Not really. The only evidence I had of psychological problems over there I dealt with were a few malingerers. They'd come in, you know darn well that they had not been taking the treatment that you'd ordered, or if they had acne on their back, they were actively rolling in the dirt to encourage it rather than take the cold. Just to stay out of the bush. They were getting a bit bush shy, and one fellow come in and he said, I've got this terrible complaint and I don't think you can fix it. And I thought, psychology here. The Yanks had these pink and grey, like a headache pill, like an Aspro, a pink and grey capsule, really flash look. And I said, look mate, take 2 of these now and 2 of these later on and see how you go in the morning, And he come in the morning, he said, gee, I'm a hell of a lot better, that's good stuff. I said, all right, okay. So just a little bit of psychology got him over the hump.
Placebo. What was the initial complaint?
Oh, I forget now. He thought it was pretty bad. Don't remember, but I remembered I fixed him up, whatever it was.
So out there in the bush, you didn't see people panic or lose control?
No, they're all, even in a big firefight, it was teamwork and mateship that sort of got them. You weren't fighting against communism or fighting for the flag or the Queen or the Prime Minister or anything. You were fighting for your mates and your survival, and they were doing the same thing. That was the general thing. And just to live another day and get your 365 days and wake you up and get on the boat or the plane and go home and get on with things.
So what happened when you were out on patrol? You came across the second big conflict?
Yeah, that wasn't till...
Christmas came before that.
You had Christmas. That was between September, October, November. Were fairly steady patrolling, not much around. Found a few bunker systems. Didn't have any major casualties. Had a bit of time back in Nui Dat. Then we were out for Christmas, and it was pretty hot and dry. There was a declared ceasefire, which was violated 80 times in the first hour. We were listening to it on the radio. I think I went over to the doctor's, Hutchie, and he always kept an ear on the radio and listening to the shenanigans going on. But we ended up getting a Christmas lunch brought out to us in the helicopter, and we had cold turkey and salad and a bun and a hot beer and a soft drink. It was different. We took pictures of each other, and we got the shaving cream out of the special pack and put fake snow on our hoochies and hung a few things around and had a few smokes. And I think the officers brought around coffee and rum to serve the troops, and I'd never had rum before, and I couldn't drink coffee, so I had a cup of tea with rum in it. It was bloody awful. Like a bloke at our meeting the other day, they said something about the dog memorials a couple of weeks' time. We're going to have a toast of rum and coffee, and he said, can I have them in separate cups? So we had Christmas in the bush, and I think it was January the 7th, we had a bit of an accident. One of our diggers was leading a overnight ambush patrol back into our harbour, which we used to do quite often. We'd send a platoon out overnight, several hundred metres to ambush a track, and we would be back in reserve. And now this fellow was coming back in, and we had a brand new reinforcement that had come in recently, and he was not fully aware of all the drills that we had, and there'd been a breakdown in communication, and the only sentry that wasn't warned that a patrol was coming in was where the patrol decided to come in on the 360 degrees of the harbour. So this fellow saw this little fellow leading the patrol with his hat turned up on one side and hadn't been warned, and bang, 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 shot him 3 times. And the first one shot 2 fingers off. The second one hit a grenade on his pouch and lodged in it and didn't set it off. And the third one went through his left chest, just below his heart, into the left of his heart, and down he went. And I'd just made a cup of tea and had a shave and was just getting ready to have a nice relaxing breakfast and a cereal block, cup of tea and a smoke, and look around. and bang, 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 everyone hit the deck. There were cups of coffee and tea getting kicked over left, right and centre, and blokes yelling and swearing and cursing, and then someone said, ceasefire, or there's been an accident or something like that, and then medic, and oh dear, grabbed my gear and went over, and he had this what I thought was a sucking chest wound, and I thought, oh, I can fix that, and I opened up his shirt, and he had a neat hole at the front and a big hole at the back, and it was all bubbly and pink and frothy and gurgling away there, and I thought, oh, it's not good, but probably lung and so on. So I ripped open a shell dressing and put one on the front, one on the back, and it seals it up. Bandaged him up and didn't give him morphine, I don't think. Anyway, I didn't notice the 2 fingers missing because there was no blood. I just whipped them off and sealed them off. And we had to get the engineers to chop down a couple of trees with their chainsaw that got winched in somehow. When you're busy with the patient, you don't see the things that are happening behind you. But anyway, a chopper came in and lowered down a cable and a stretcher frame, a Stokes litter, I think it was, a sort of a wire mesh cradle. And we popped him into that, and I wrote out a medical thing and pinned it to him, and hoped he was going to be all right. And he's going up, and his hands were clutching the side of it, and then I saw the 2 fingers missing. And take him away. It's no good bringing him back to patch 2 fingers. So he went away, and at the hospital he died technically 3 times for periods up to 23 minutes, and they had to open his chest up and massage his heart like squeezing a tennis ball, and got him around again, patched him up. It hadn't got his lung, but it got intestines and spleen, and the bubbles were from the gases that the bullet had dragged in after it on the way through. And it was sort of on the margin of the ribs and the lungs and so on. But anyway, he survived, and his wife had given birth only a week before, so he was a pretty lucky man. And the army tried to get rid of him because he had the 2 fingers missing, and he stayed in for 25, 30 years, I think, and he's only just got out. He got a clerical job after that. And I've met him a few times, and he sent for the book recently, so wonderful story. And when he woke up in hospital, he came to after the anaesthetic and so on, and the medical orderly that was looking after him was John Hector, my mate, who had black horn-rimmed glasses, crew cut, and Tony woke up and he said, "What the hell are you doing here, Sam?" And John said, "You're with Sam's mob, he's my best mate." And so it all sort of fitted in,
So it must be really gratifying to see the result of that really chaotic situation then for you.
Yeah, from an accident to, it would have been shocking had he died. I mean, a lot of us would have been, even the blokes that didn't warn the sentry himself, the officer that commanded that section, and
So then you move forward. Is this still in the middle of the 54-day stretch?
That probably is about that time, getting towards the end of my tether.
So what happened then around leading up to this second big conflict that you
The second
encountered?
big one, routine patrols, everything fine. We're into February, the dry season, a lot of dust and heat, and starting to feel pretty flat and disinterested and ready to go home. A lot of my intake had already gone home, and people were saying, 8th intake, I'll be home by Christmas. Well, Christmas came and went. January came and went. February, and it was end of February, and I was getting a bit cheesed off. I'd survived so far, and thought, well, if they keep me here too much longer, my odds are getting tight. Anyway, I sat in on an O group this day, and I said, righto, we've B Company on patrol tomorrow, and we're going to go out and we're going to clean up a small enemy party who are guarding a weapons cache. Not a few kilometres from here. We're going to pack up all the gear. We're going to go and we're going to attack them and clean them up. It's only looked after by a small group. We thought, righto, this will be pretty easy. And next morning we saddled up all our gear, and it was pretty open country, dry season rice paddy, sparse bush, a lot of dust, and for some reason we had 3 tanks with us. They were coming along for the ride, 52-tonne Centurions, a lot of noise and smoke and so on. I thought, well, gee, we're not sneaking up on anybody today. So I sort of switched off a bit, and we were spaced about 20 metres apart, pretty wide, and we're plodding along, and we'd gone for about an hour, and the sweat was starting to sort of come through, and you think, oh, let's get this over with. I'm ready to go back to Nui Dat and pack my gear and go home. And the CSM come up alongside me, and he said, Corporal Brown, have you got any Keelan powders? I didn't quite catch. I said, pardon, sir? He said, Keelan powders. Kaolin powders. They're an anti-diarrheal crushed clay. I said, oh, have you got a problem? He said, no, for the VC, we're going to give them the shits today. I said, oh, well, good, sir. I hope so, sir. And off he went. He was sort of coming along, just checking the patrol as he's going up to the front. And he was always on the go. And away he went. And I said, oh, yeah, good-o. And time went by, and it's probably up around 1 o'clock, I think. We must have stopped for a bite somewhere, and ready to stop again, and going across a big clearing with stubble about a foot high, and lots of dust, and the tanks, and just getting a bit cheesed off, and boom! I heard this big boom, and a big cloud of black smoke and a red flame, sort of about 200 metres ahead. I thought, oh, Struth, what's that? And sort of sank down to one knee, and everyone around sort of, oh, what's going on, And then rat-a-tat-tat, boom, crash, rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat, and then just continuous firing. I thought, gee, we've found them, and they're cleaning them out already. Should be right. Yeah. And little knowing that it was a VC mine that had started the contact and killed 2 of our blokes, and wounded a whole heap of others, and started the conflict. And anyway, I'm there thinking, well, this is fine, and it's not going to be much. It'll all be all over shortly, and we'll go back and clear out. Then the word come back, medic up the front. Ah, that's me. All right. Someone's hurt, and it's still going on. It's still happening. So I sort of went forward, sort of at a half crouch, and probably took me about 5 minutes to get there. And Willie was a few yards in front of me, so I grabbed the satchel of shell dressings and hooked it on, and had my big pack and bum pack, and sort of away I went and got up there, and it's all still happening, and I'm crouching even lower, and I saw a body there that was all mangled up and smashed, and there was a fella behind his pack, and he's sort of, not shooting but in position. I said, oh, get one, did we, mate? He said, no, it's one of ours. Oh. So then I could see this group of people up front, and I could see blood and stuff, and they were all sort of pretty messy. So I went up to them and started trying to prioritise who I was going to treat first. So I picked on Bluey, who had lots of holes in his legs and chest and so on, and the others were all peppered with shrapnel. In fact, a bloke rang me yesterday who was involved in that, and I hadn't heard from him since that day. And he had 17 holes in him from shrapnel from that initial blast. And anyway, so I picked on Blue and started patching him up, and then the action was still happening, and the tanks were about 10 or 15 metres to my left, and the enemy were up there in their bunkers. Turned out to be a whole battalion, apart from a small party that we were supposed to hit, a whole battalion of regulars, and they were putting rockets into the tanks and machine gun fire, and our blokes were shooting them, and then a fire started in the stubble, and so I was patching Blue up. Then the CSM, who had 22 pellet holes in him, said, we've got to move him back. So we grabbed him and we dragged him back over about 10 minutes, back over a little dip into the rice paddy, a paddy bund. And as we were going back, I saw the commanding officer and the signaller and a few others down in a little bit of a hollow, and they had the radio sets and that, and I realised that I didn't have enough equipment to work on. I didn't have any intravenous fluids, so I yelled out to them as we went past, get onto Starlight, which was a code sign for the doctor. I was Starlight Minor, being a medic. So to get onto Starlight, want intravenous fluids and Starlight. So I need him to come and give me a hand, which is not the usual done thing. You don't bring the doctor forward. You usually take the patient back to the... But he was at battalion headquarters a few kilometres away. So a helicopter brought him to the back of where the action was, and he came forward, behind this bun, and we put intravenous fluids in and patching him up, and we got him in the chopper, and he died on the way to hospital. The other fella was already dead, and then we had tankies with their groin and backside sort of blown off and heads smashed and all sorts of wounds, and then we finally did a tactical withdrawal because we weren't getting anywhere, and we pulled back across the clearing to where the Kiwis Whisky Company were our backup group, and they were waiting back there to come and assist if needed, but it was no good getting them involved and getting more complicated, so we pulled back after about 2 hours of fighting. And I was thinking, this is, I've had it. My back was killing me, and I had a small voice in my head saying, just get a nick, just get anything, get wounded, get the hell out of here, this is not healthy. And so we got the wounded into the choppers, and we gradually withdrew, and one of the wounded tankies gave me a .45 pistol with a pearl handle on it, and looked pretty flash. I put it in my pocket and gave it back later to one of the officers. But in the withdrawal, my big pack was still up in the forward section, and I thought, nah, I'm not going back in there to get my big pack, I can stay there. And so we went back and retreated all the way back to, or withdrew all the way back to our previous campsite, and redug our pits and settled back in again, and getting ready to go in again next day and attack again with a lot more support, because by that stage the jets were napalming and bombing, and the artillery was coming, and we're giving it a real pounding in there. And we thought, well, next day we'll go in and we'll do it again. And we don't want to go in, but we will, and we'll avenge what's happened. And that evening we got a signal through saying that tomorrow is the truce, a religious festival throughout the country, and there will be a complete ceasefire, and 4 Battalion will be moved from this area to another operational area. And we thought, we've been in there, we've lost 2 killed and all those wounded, and a tank smashed up and all the tankies ruined for life, and we're just going to leave it. And that's what happened. So frustration plus. So for that, our major got the military cross, I got the military medal, and there were 3 or 4 MIDs handed out. And the bloke that was in charge of the tanks, he's a hero. The middle tank of the 3 was hit by all these rockets, and it was only a brand new tank prior to this, and the crew were all wounded severely, and he jumped out of his tank with pistol in hand, shot a couple of enemy on his way over to the other tank, helped get him out, helped get it withdrawn, then back to his tank. And I think he shot another enemy on the way back with his pistol. And for that he only got a mention in dispatches, which is the minor award, because of the rationing system. Our major got the MC, and so on. But later on, in another big action in Bin Ba, this fellow got a military cross.
So can you tell us a little bit more about what it was that you actually did during that firefight that was ultimately brought you the military medal?
Yeah, well, I didn't think it was for that occasion. I thought it may have been for September the 13th, the Black Friday, but the ration of medals had already been given out there to the lieutenant that conducted the assault. He got the military cross, his sergeant got the Distinguished Conduct Medal, and our lieutenant got the MID. So that was the ration. There probably should have been other medals awarded to the diggers that rescued their mates or tried to rescue their mates and got shot. Nothing. But for Goodwood, February the 16th, the citation read that Corporal Brown moved forward from a relatively safe position, where I was out in the paddy field, to where the area was being swept, to where the wounded were, and the area was being swept by a continuous machine gun, rocket and small arms fire. He was blown to the ground by a rocket burst and continued to move forward. I don't remember the rocket burst, but anyway, moved forward to rescue the wounded. And then it says blah, 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 the usual things like during the course of his whole time in Viet Nam, he's been pretty good bloke and done the right things. And yeah, so I think looking back at it, I think it was a combination of Black Friday, Goodwood, A couple of other occasions just going forward, just obeying orders. The medic's job is to patch them up when they're wounded, not to hang back, and get in and do it, even though you're scared, pretty scared at the time. You're more scared, I think, of not going in and your mates thinking, you know, you haven't got the spine to do it, than actually getting up on your haunches and ducking your head down and getting in there. And being pretty skinny at the time, they missed. So,
Was that something that you were actually concerned about, being able to do that, not letting your mates down?
yeah. Whenever you hear a shot fired, you think, who's been hit? Where have they been hit? Can I handle it? Can I save them? Will it be too gory if it's a gut wound and all the intestines are spilling out? Will I be able to handle it? I haven't actually had to yet, and I never did, luckily. But you get all these scenarios that you sort of semi-process in advance, and luckily most of them never happen. Most of them are fairly clean and clear-cut, and when you get there you sort of fly by the seat of your pants, and with the equipment you've got you do what you can and get that chopper in quick and get them off my hands and get the responsibility off my back. I always felt responsible. And the most beautiful sound I ever heard in Viet Nam was the chopper coming in to take the wounded away or to take us back to Nui Dat, not taking us out into the bush. That was a bit of an adrenaline adventure thing, but getting the wounded out, and within 20 minutes they'd have them in hospital and getting proper care from a doctor and nurses and orderlies and assistants. And
So what's your view about the way that citation summarises what you did that day?
I think there's a criteria that the person citing me has to meet certain guidelines, and seeing that 4 Battalion hadn't had a military medal winner at that stage, they needed one, or there was one available, and I bought the book of decorations for the Army, seeing that I was in it, just to evaluate some of the others, and that a lot of blokes did a hell of a lot more than I did to get a military medal, and there was the odd few that possibly did similar amount. So they all vary, and it's in the eyes of the person that witnesses the deeds. The whole award system is pretty crook, let me tell you. There were 750 odd, I think, for the whole army in Viet Nam over nearly 10 years, and 82% went to regular soldiers, and the rest went to national servicemen, who made up about 48% of the fighting force, mostly in the field, facing the dangers. And the tracker dogs didn't get any at all, and they did multiple tours and shared the dangers and were left in the country.
Right. So can we go back to Goodwood? It was called
Operation Goodwood.
When you look back on that now, what do you see in your mind when you look back? What images do you see?
I could still picture crossing that clearing and seeing the explosion and seeing the cluster of wounded and the body laying there. I can see all that and see the withdrawal, see the doctor arriving, seeing Bluey there with all the holes in him and just fading into unconsciousness, luckily, telling me that it's hurting a bit, hurts a bit, Sam, something like that. Bit of a really lovely lad, just due to go home in a couple of weeks, brought into company headquarters for safety, as was his mate, Vic Peterson, and both just gone like that, the only 2 we lost in 12 months. And just feeling the frustration of the waste of surrendering that position, and in the end surrendering the whole country for something that was a concoction to start with.
What do you remember thinking at the time when all of that happened? I mean, how fast did it happen, and how fast did you have to react?
The initial explosion sort of snapped me out of my reverie, but then things seemed to take forever. It seemed like I was in action for hours and hours, several hours rather than just, I think, an hour and 40 minutes we were actually in there, according to the signals. And I was exhausted, having walked for several hours before that, and been gradually fatigued over previous weeks and months, and having a crook back from the chopper dropping the winch on it. But then thinking when it was all over, goodness, that was a real stuff up. You know, that was supposed to be a walk in the park, just another little patrol where we mightn't have even seen anybody. They might have cleared out before we got there, and we would have blown up all the ammo and souvenired a few things and gone on our way. And here we are, we've lost two of the best blokes you could ever wish to meet, and a lot of fellas wounded, and yeah, and a lot of enemy killed too, I presume.
So you went in when you were treating the wounded. You were under fire.
Yeah.
So what do you remember, sort of, about that scene? About that?
Yeah, when I first went in, Blue was there, and I was cutting his trousers and shirt off and getting to the wounds. And the tank was about 15 metres away, and the enemy were presumably 20 or 30 metres the other way, which is pretty close. But we were in a little bit of a hollow, I think. Must have been, because they kept missing us. And they kept firing rockets over the top of us and into the tanks, and the backblast from the rockets were washing back over us. And it was just like being in hell, I suppose. Lots of noise, smoke, flame, heat, and blood and guts and stink, and all the sensations and things that you don't like were all happening at once. And the fatigue and the anxiety about being hit. If you're going to get hit, where do you want to get hit? And of course, having no choice in the matter, you realise the futility of it all. And wondering about what's happening in other sectors. You know, this is happening here, but the whole battlefield was probably spread over 100 metre front. But finding out later that the others weren't in as much action. They were firing into the bunkers, but weren't under direct, or under fire, but spasmodic.
And when you're treating someone in that situation, being fired on, you're not able to be treating someone and defending yourself.
No, my rifle and big pack were laying down on the ground, and I just had the medical kit open, and I was kneeling next to Blue and trying to ascertain where the major wounds were. Had a lot of bleeding around the legs, but I think the fatal wounds were probably those that were in his chest, deep in his chest. Because when the mine went up, all these pellets and shrapnel, just probably thousands of pieces, just blew out at a great rate of knots. And got Smithy and Billy Mormel and Jock Richardson and Blue and Vic Peterson copped the main blast and was just dead instantly.
And he was already dead. He was the body that you saw when and that you.
It was just a body with sort of rags and bits and pieces of gear around and unrecognisable. Not that I knew Vic very well. I knew Blue really well. He used to come and visit in the company aid post quite often, just for a yarn, and come and have a visit and have a scratch that he'd want treated, and just for attention and say good day. Lovely man.
So you knew him quite well. So
and then the bodies got choppered back to the hospital, got cleaned up, and were sent back to Australia. My mate John Hector actually helped clean the bodies up and had a pretty tough time doing that. And the bodies are freighted back to Australia, and they go off to their hometown for a funeral. And it wasn't until probably 15 to 20 years later that several of us made contact with both sets of parents. Or the mother of Blue, her husband had died and another son had been killed in a motorbike accident, so she'd had a really tough time. But she really welcomed us when we went to visit, and Vic's parents just treated us like family.
And Blue was alive when you were treating him, and he was talking.
Yeah. He was just laying there basically, and then he said, it's hurting a bit, or I'm a bit sore, something like that. And then he just drifted into unconsciousness, and then he didn't survive, despite the doctor and the intravenous fluids and into the chopper. See, in the chopper between the battlefield and the hospital, there's a medic on board, but there's a lot of noise and a lot of things happening, and there's a limited amount to what they can do. So somewhere during that time, he may have already been dead, and we were just filling him full of fluids, but about that time he died.
You mentioned that there were all sorts of wounds that day. What were the other injuries that you saw?
The fellow that rang me yesterday, Ron Smith, he had 17 shrapnel wounds, and I assume most of them were sort of face and arms and chest. Jock Richardson had 22 holes in him, mostly face and shoulder. Bill Mormel, I'm not sure. He just would have had a scattering of pellets. So I concentrated on Blue just about the whole time, whereas the other medics, the stretcher bearers and the tanky sergeant did some work too. One tanky had a rocket explode under his seat in the tank, and his buttocks and genitals were severely traumatised, and but he lived. And another one had his head smashed against the steel cupola, and he was very badly damaged, but I believe he lived for some time. I think maybe both of them are deceased now. And the other injuries I'm not aware of. They were hustled off, patched up, hustled off, and no feedback.
No feedback?
No feedback.
Did you ever get any feedback?
Only from a mate, John Hector, when he could, but it was about that time he was due to go home, and so that all ceased.
Was that difficult for you?
Yes, I used to wonder what happened, but not having the wherewithal to follow it up. I couldn't phone up the hospital. You just didn't have a phone, which is another thing you missed. Some of our people back in Nui Dat would have obviously gone down to Vung Tau, visited them, taken any gear they wanted, and reported back to Nui Dat. But we didn't get any reports until we choppered back into Nui Dat. And then it was old news, and it was time to clean up your gear, have a couple of beers and get a feed, have a game of basketball on our court between the rubber trees, and do the other things. And the replacements had come in, and there were other patrols to get ready for.
So during the chaos of that Operation Goodwood, when all of that is happening, I mean, how do you sort of stay focused and not, I mean, you said that you never saw other men faltering in that situation. What sort of happens in that situation? What goes through your mind? And
I guess I'm just living from moment to moment, hoping that it's going to stay quiet, the patrols are going to be uneventful, no one's going to get wounded, any rashes and that I can handle, and just each day is another day less that I have to do. But the frustrating part was that I didn't know how many days I had left. Most diggers had their start date and their finish date, their ETA, but I didn't have that, so it was wasn't up to me. So until I got choppered into hospital with my query appendix and got sent back to Nui Dat, and there was already a replacement medic out there for me, Dick Schwer, who knows how long I would have had to stay. So that sort of set the ball rolling for my discharge or sending home. And it was actually quite a surprise when I got back to Nui Dat and they said, pack your gear up, you're going home in a couple of days. So it meant I had to get all the mud off my boots and out of the treads and clean all my gear and pack my trunk and have a blood test and get the final malaria pills started and all that sort of stuff. And even then I thought, well, I'm still not going to get out of the country. Something's going to happen. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. And even on the Qantas jet flying out of Saigon, I was thinking, and looking out the porthole, thinking they can still get rockets up here. They can still put me away. And then I think when we got about over Borneo, about 2 or 3 hours later, I thought, I think I'm going to make it. And that's when I started to feel relief. I've been to Viet Nam, I've got over it, I've survived, and I've got here. And then it was probably, I'd been home a few days, a week maybe, And I used to lay in bed and wake up and think, did Viet Nam happen? Perhaps it was a bad dream. And I thought, how could I know all those details if it was a dream? No, it did happen. Then I'd see things that I brought home with me and I think, oh, it did happen, yeah, and that happened and that. Oh, then it all got jumbled. For years and years it got jumbled until I sorted it out chronologically for the book.
Just going back to when you were in those firefights, that the Black Friday. I wanted to ask you about the choppers and how it was pitch black when
Pitch
the chopper
black, 9
came
o'clock
in.
at night.
How did the chopper know where to come and
We
how
had a torch on the ground, a single torch with an angled beam, and so that was shone up and they were given rough directions as to grid references on the map. A bit hard at night, but we had the torch and they knew where battalion headquarters was because that's where they'd waited. They'd come down there and pause while we got from A back to B. And it wasn't too far for them to come, so they had a rough idea, compass bearing maybe, and one torchlight on the ground shining up. And then they'd come down almost to treetop level, then they'd turn on their landing lights to position themselves and then turn them off again and lower the winch cable down so it didn't tangle in the trees and just hover there and take one up and then lower it down, get another one. Very, very slow process, and but brilliant people. I actually met one of the people that was crewing on the winch years later. A reporter got the story and he'd phoned my mother, that's right, and it developed. He phoned Mum about something and she said, who were you with? And he said, I was with the helicopters, 9 Squadron. And she said, when we were there, and he told her the dates, and she said, well, my son was there at the same time, and where were you on September the 13th? And he said, oh, we had a milk run then and we got diverted to winch some casualties out. And she said, well, my son was the medic on the ground. So it all sort of linked in and we had a big reunion. And
So how hard was it to manoeuvre a helicopter into that situation and winch the casualties out?
Pretty hard. I think conditions were fairly still, which was pretty good. If there'd been a side cross wind blowing, it would have been even harder. But just to keep it at the hover there, and you know, because so many pedals and so many factors involved and weight distribution, pretty difficult.
And it must have been sort of tense moments for you on the ground as well.
Well, we thought too that if the enemy is still around and we'd only shot at them 400 metres away, if they'd run away and come around with the hope of shooting down our rescue helicopter, which was a great tactic of theirs, a couple of bullets into that and the whole flaming helicopter could have landed on our B Company camp with 100 men and wiped out half of us. So, pretty worrying.
And you actually said earlier, I think that in one of those incidents, I'm not sure if it was Black Friday, that the chopper actually dropped one of the... Did you say one of the wounded was actually...
No, that was back, the Kiwi bloke.
The Kiwi bloke was dropped, yeah.
Yeah, the winch cable jammed and they had to cut him off and drop him on the ground.
They had to cut him off, actually. Yeah. Did that sort of thing happen very often?
Not very often, no. I was in another chopper, another incident, probably before Christmas. And this is a pretty important one too. I got a new replacement stretcher bearer, a fellow called Barry Rice, and he was only about 19 and green as grass. And he came to join us and he'd been with us about 2 days out in the bush and he thought it was great. And I was showing him how to fix the tinea on the officer's toes. And we heard bang, 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 bang from about 50 metres away on the perimeter. The camp was in a circle and we were sort of in the middle of it. And it was on the perimeter area that the officer was in control of. So he sprinted back to his hoochie and I threw his boots after him. And Barry sort of, what's going on, what's going on? I said, I don't know, Barry. And then the word come around that the VC patrol had come through and bumped into our sentry, and our sentry had shot one of them, and the other 5 or 6 had cleared off. And Barry said, oh, can I go and see the body? I said, oh, sure you want to? He said, yeah, I want to see the body. I thought, well, I can use this as a training tool. You know, I can show him a dead body and we can investigate the wounds and so on. And about that time, they sent out a clearing patrol. And then they saw this body and the clearing patrol clears the area, make sure no one's sort of loitering there to shoot back and surprise them. and they saw a body in the grass, and the back of the head was towards the patrol, and to make sure, they usually put a bullet into the head to make sure that they're not going to surprise anybody. And so anyway, we heard this single shot, and all right, okay. So I went to see the CSM, and I said, Private Rice would like to go out and have a look at the body, sir. It would be good experience to get him warmed up before we have the real thing. He said, oh yeah, yeah. Right. So we got our webbing on and our rifles, and away we went out, and the bullet that had gone through the back of the head had blown the whole forehead off, so you could see right into the skull. And Barry sort of walked up and went and vomited a few metres away, and I said, well, you know, that's the body, Barry, that's how it is, mate. And anyway, he settled down then, and we stripped the bloke, and he'd been shot through the ribs. And I said, well, that would have killed him, definitely would have shot him in the heart. And down he went, and we checked him over, and Barry sort of appreciated the technical side of it all. But this bloke also had a medical kit with him, so it was the medic on patrol with the VC that they'd shot. So then we went through all the instruments that he had, which were pretty primitive and blunt, and a few ampules and pills and things that he had, and thought, gee, you know, it could well have been us if the shoe had been on the other foot. And the reality of medics getting shot over there sort of came through.
Absolutely. I mean, you were in the front line. You were there,
Yeah,
and not even able to hold a gun while you're treating somebody.
Yeah. But had the situation arisen where I was just shooting along with the others and we didn't have casualties and I wasn't working, I mean, I would have definitely got involved, because self-preservation, much as you don't want to do it, and not realising at the time that, you know, they shouldn't have really been our enemy. They were a country sort of going for a united country, as it's turned out, and we were there by our own invitation. Everything was sort of concocted. You know, I still would have gone through and had a shot at them if they were shooting at me.
Did you ever have to shoot at the enemy?
No. I only had one accidental shot over there with an M60. The idiot RSM. We were in camp on our first major operation, and the machine gunner in the group was crook. So he said, Corporal Brown, grab the M60, you're going out on patrol. And I sort of stammered and stuttered and said something about I'm the medic, and he said, pick up the M60 and you're on patrol. You know, he didn't realise how little training I'd had with an M60, and that the guns are faulty from time to time. So as you go through the wire, you cock the weapon. So I cocked the weapon, and it fired a single shot as I slid the safety catch, the cocking lever back forward, narrowly missing the foot of the bloke in front of me, sort of, and over towards the villagers who were standing there briefly until they retreated inside. Anyway, the patrol didn't miss a beat. We kept marching, did our patrol, did the ambush, came back in. I was charged with an accidental discharge and fined $40, which was a week's pay. And being a corporal, I only got a severe reprimand. And had I been a private, I would have lost 28 days pay and 28 days punishment. Yeah, for probably a faulty gun. And I shouldn't have been put in charge of it anyway. So,
Well, that must have. How did you feel about that?
I felt pretty bad. I could have shot the bloke. If I'd cocked it this way, I would have shot him through the back. But luckily I had it pointing down, and it went harmlessly into the distance. Yeah, but I felt embarrassed. Felt pretty bad.
Sure.
And then I was up in front of the commanding officer, the colonel, to, you know, face the charge. Have you got anything to say? I said, I believe the weapon was faulty, sir. And he'd had it checked with the armour, and the armour said he can find no fault with the weapon at this time. Then the RSM marched me outside again, and he stood about an inch from my face, and he said, you will not let it happen again, you legless lizard. I said, I'll try not to, sir. I thought, you can't hit me, you can only yell at me. And this went on for about 5 minutes, backwards and forward. You will not. I said, I'll try not to, sir. And he just hated me.
I want to ask you, what sort of debriefing did you receive after those major incidents? Those
None. Nothing at all. You just got on with it.
So after being involved in Black Friday and then the Operation Goodwood.
The only
which were
feedback
both-
I got from Black Friday, the major in charge of Charlie Company, their group came and joined our company because they had sort of decimated a bit. They linked up with our company and we travelled together for a couple of days. And he came over to my aid post in the bush and he said, thanks for your help yesterday. I believe you did a really good job, or words to that effect. And I said, that's all right, sir. And he asked me details about the wounded and I told him, and yeah. And he's the one that came to my house in Adelaide and said, you've won the medal later on. I thought, oh. And I've met him a couple of times since. Yeah.
When you told that story earlier about Black Friday, you said that I think you couldn't sleep that night, that you were in a bit of a daze.
Yeah.
So at what point did you start to sort of feel, to recover, if you like, from that state that you were in?
Probably the night after I got some sleep, but then it kept recurring, and it did for years, probably 15, 20 years. That particular episode kept going, what could I have done, what? And then finally I said to myself, look, you did all you could with what you had. You've got it in the book now, you've written about it. And that sort of helped to settle me down.
So that was the concern you had, that you could have
Yeah,
done something
that I'd
else?
failed. Yeah.
Why did you think that?
I felt I could, the bloke shouldn't have died, but then it was 5 hours plus since the wounding, and it was a terrible wound to the time we got him in the chopper. So the time factor probably killed him. There probably wasn't much more I could have done, really. But I thought I'd hoped I could have, even with Blue. You know, I'd hoped the wounds didn't look that bad. And he probably died of severe internal wounds in the chest that we couldn't visualise. Just neat little pellet hole, but going right, it may have gone into the heart, and shock. So, yeah.
And after the Goodwood incident, when you'd made that withdrawal, when the choppers had taken the wounded away, what happened then?
Then we withdrew or retreated back across the paddy field, right back through the Kiwi position where the tanks remained, and all the way back to where we started from that morning. And we got there about dark, and I was just exhausted and in a lot of pain from bending over. My back was like I'd been snapped off in the middle. I think it was just RSI from leaning over continually. Got back there. I got Willie to rub some liniment into my lower back. I took some codeine. Got a bit of sleep that night. Exhausted. Got up in the morning and we got helicoptered out to another area. And I think that's when I got my possible appendix a couple of weeks after that. It might have been a 54-day period where one operation led into another because we had the enemy on the run, and intelligence were telling us where they were, and we were chasing them up and having good results, and light casualties ourselves.
So in an incident such as that, when people had died and many people had been seriously wounded, there was no debriefing, no discussion afterwards about what had happened and why it had happened?
No. I don't recall any post-mortem of the day. We all just felt that frustrated, and the only thing we talked about officially at O groups was what's happening today and tomorrow. You know, or maybe one battalion had a big contact and cleaned up so many enemy over in an area, and we go, oh yeah, that's right, they're onto them. And you get in a certain mode where the past sort of retreats and you only concentrate on what's happening now and in the future.
Was he Scottish, the officer who had spoken to you that day about how they were going to whip the VC?
Had 22 holes in him. Yeah. And he was taken to hospital and sent home. That was the end of his tour. And he's the one that actually put me in for the medal. And I didn't know about it until about 10 years ago. He came here one day and I said, who put me in for it? And he said, I did. Oh. I said, you shouldn't have done that. I didn't do anything special. He said, yes you did. Yes you did. You came forward when you didn't really have to. You were in a position of safety and you actually came forward and, faced the danger. Yeah, I suppose I did, yeah.
What do you think now about that?
Yeah, it's sort of getting into its right compartment now. Yeah.
What do you mean?
I can understand why he did it. But then, had I been putting one in for someone in a similar situation, I would have perhaps mentioned other dates where things were done. But maybe things happened back then and you didn't document them. Maybe he thought, well, he's done a pretty good job today. Yeah, and he's been all right there and there, yeah, so we'll lump it all together. He did this on this day with all the details. And at the bottom, throughout his whole tour, he's been a good medic, sort of. I think, oh, yeah.
When you met him again and he told you that, did you discuss what happened that day?
Not really, no. He wasn't one for going into detail or commenting on other people's decisions and so on. Tried to pump him on a few things for my book. I wrote to him and said, look, Jock, can you give me some details of this for the book, different things for the book? And he wrote back and he gave me a reference. I thought, that's not really what I was after.
So, after that event, did you sort of wonder about the decision making that had been, had gone on and?
Yeah.
Why
Everyone
it
in the
happened?
company did, I think, from where the decision came to attack this position and the information that they had, the intelligence, obviously crook. But we did have an enemy agent with us, or friendly agent, yeah, whatever. An agent with us who was supposed to lead us to the spot. And whether he was an actual enemy who was attracting us into the ambush situation that it turned out to be, we'll never know, because he cleared off before anyone could shoot him. So they all reckon if they had seen him going, they would have shot him, but he slipped away. And we had a group of ARVN people with the South Vietnamese army, and they cleared off too, just after it all started. They were a bit gun shy.
I know you said earlier that you didn't notice any people deteriorating or going, sort of
Losing the plot.
losing the plot. But what sort of reactions did you observe in people after they'd been involved in an operation like that one, and observe in yourself in terms of how people reacted mentally or emotionally?
They were all very flat emotionally at the end of ops. Start off fresh, gradually deteriorate over time with sleep deprivation and poor food and the constant threat of an adrenaline rush, constant fear of a contact from the front, the back, the side, wherever. It's treading on a mine. You never knew when it was going to happen. Luckily they didn't have an air force. That would have been another worry. But just gradually towards the end of an op, they got flat and emotionally debilitated. And back in camp, I think a cold shower, a good feed, a couple of beers, and they just started to charge up the batteries again. That was a cycle kept going through, and gradually the battery would lose its potency.
And did people talk about those people who had died?
I think only those who were in their tents, like there's 2 empty beds, or an empty bed here and an empty bed in the next tent. Those blokes would have been really knocked around, and they obviously talked about it and drank a lot and had trouble with the replacement people who came in, accepting them. There's all this, the dynamics of the Rios coming and the vacancies occurring. But the rest of the people that didn't really know them, I mean, I knew Bluey pretty well, and I was very upset that he'd gone. But then there was always the other 100 odd to focus on, and what's going to happen next.
Were there any ceremonies held for those people?
No. There was one, but at the end of the battalion's tour, just prior to getting on the aircraft carrier to come home, they had a ceremony and read out the names of the 18 killed from 4 Battalion and blow the trumpet, and that's it. But nothing at the lower levels, the lower unit levels.
And nothing at the time?
No.
Were you a religious person?
Sort of, yeah. I was a Sunday school teacher back as a teenager, and I used to pray over there a lot for preservation and for the family at home and the diggers and so on. Not overtly, it was always private. And I think that helped a lot.
Were there any particular moments when you really felt the need to pray?
No, just several, maybe dozens, maybe 20 times or more. Just times when it got tough there, and the regular little maintenance ones. You know.
What about your own emotional condition after you'd been involved in those pretty harrowing firefights and witnessed people dying and tried to help to save them and saved several people, no doubt. How did you notice your own condition deteriorating at all?
Physically, just a low energy level, or lowered energy level. Mentally flat, and from time to time thinking about my own mortality, thinking, right, you know, that's Joe Blow now. That could be me later on. Gee, I'm not going to be a good-looking corpse. And where am I going to get hit? And is it going to be painful? And how will the folks at home react? And all sorts of jumbled thoughts about what might happen. But then thinking, well, I'm here and so far so good. Not even a nick, just a bit of a fever now and again and a bit of rash, and crystalline penicillin fixed that up, and after the 54 days I got a thorough case of ring tinea all around the groin, and all the lymph nodes had swollen up, and the skin was breaking down, and just going rotten. And I'd been putting different creams and ointments and taking pills, and nothing happened, and the doctor put me on crystalline penicillin. In 24 hours I was on the mend. But gee, it hurt like hell. Crystalline penicillin's like a red hot dagger being pushed into your muscle and twisted. It's agony. And I used to give them to blokes and say, what are you whinging about? What are you whinging for? Oh, then I had one. Bloody hell. Yeah. And they give them in the thigh too. Which is,
You said earlier today that before you left for Vietnam, you felt pretty confident about how well prepared you were and how well trained you were.
Yeah, well, I think the people that were training us indicated that, whatever they'd been teaching us would be sufficient for us to cope over there, and, she'll be right, and you'll do well, and, you're fighting communism, and we're the good guys, and we've got the Americans. We had to watch them. They caused 25% of our casualties by accidents.
Was it a general view that the Americans were
Dangerous.
dangerous?
Yes. They were very, very helpful. They were great with their helicopter rescues. They would fly in amongst the treetops where the Australian pilots wouldn't or weren't allowed to, because they only had a limited amount of choppers, but the Yanks had only $500,000 each, and out of 12,000 I think they lost about half of them over there, shot down, so they put them into dangerous situations. But my mate in Charlie Company was on patrol, and they were in an old VC bunker system that they'd taken over, and they were camped there, and they'd indicated that they wanted the American jets to strafe in an area to the west of the smoke that they'd thrown. You throw coloured smoke and that indicates where you want it. Well, they decided that they see these figures up on the bunkers, they were going to strafe there on the other side of the smoke. So they went to them, and they wounded, I think, 16 blokes pretty severely in one or two runs before they were called off. You're shooting at us, you fools, Oh, sorry. Just like that. So a quarter of a company nearly wiped out. And my mate luckily wasn't in his pit at the time. He was down in the creek filling water bottles, and he came back and the bullets had stitched up his pit from top to bottom, and had a lucky escape. And I think only a week later, the same company were camped out at night, and a plane coming back from a mission had one bomb left, and they thought, oh well, we'll drop it here. and it was right on the perimeter of where they were camped, and luckily it landed in soft, muddy soil, and it buried deep into the mud and blew upwards instead of outwards, and they had a few blokes with broken ribs and concussion and so on, but nobody was killed. So they, you know, the Yanks can be very dangerous. They're pretty gung-ho. Yeah.
And what did you like about Blinky Bill?
Blinky Bill was our commanding officer, Major Bill, and he was a straight shooter. He told us as it was, early days in Viet Nam, he said the whole thing is rotten here. The war is crooked, but we're here, we will do our job, be very careful, look after your mates, and I want to see everybody, if possible, come home. And we camouflaged, we didn't walk on tracks, we did everything carefully to preserve the blokes. And unfortunately on Goodwood we lost 2, but that was out of our hands. That was not his decision to go in there. That was from somewhere else. He's a really nice bloke too. Sensible, caring, and good to be around.
You were saying that you were saying to your mum you'd make your own decision about Vietnam when you got over there. When did your views start to change?
Yeah, I sort of tried to believe the doctrine about fighting communism and we're doing the right thing and we're here for the good guys against the bad guys, and after a couple of months I thought, no, that's not right. We're cleaning out bunker systems and the enemy are reoccupying. It's a bit of a game, and the boffins that are running the game aren't here. We're here, taking all the risks, and the politicians and the others, the generals and the brigadiers, most of them aren't here. And a lot of time we had to get permission to shoot, and we had to relay it back to Nui Dat, onto Saigon, and I think sometimes back to Australia before we were allowed to do certain things. And we had free fire zones and we had no fire zones, and sometimes you're only allowed to shoot if you got shot at first, and that's a bit risky. And it was getting, you know, pretty silly. And the local people, they didn't know which way was up. They were frightened of the VC, they were frightened of us, and the Americans would rub out their whole town and move them to a safe area, and that was terrible.
How did you come away thinking about the enemy?
I still had this sort of deep-seated almost hatred for them because they'd been killing us and we should be killing them. That was a pretty simplistic sort of feeling I had, but then I also had the feeling that they were to be admired for their tenacity in fighting the big American power for so long, because this was 68, 69, they've been going since 60, 61, and they went on till 75, and they'd seen the Chinese off and they'd seen the French off their turf. They were in there for the long haul, and I didn't realise at the time that they were actually trying to unite the country. I didn't know the politics, the full political story about the French being there and the Americans putting President Diem in as a puppet government, and how crooked he was, and he was bumping off hundreds of thousands of people with torture and prison and so on, and the Americans were saying that the VC are all the baddies doing the torture and the killing, and you know, it was pretty even. But once the war finished, the place is united, and as it turned out, I'm happy to go back there and see a peaceful Viet Nam, although I can't see behind the scenes at everything that's going on.
What happened when you came home on the family front?
Yeah, flew into Sydney with my mate Darryl. He flew to Rocky. I flew to Adelaide next morning after a couple of hours sleep, because they snuck us in the middle of the night, about midnight, and find your own accommodation unless you want to go out to the army place at Holsworthy. I didn't want to do that. Got a little hotel at Coogee for a couple of hours, a couple of beers, a couple of sandwiches. On the early plane to Adelaide, got off the plane, there's no one there to meet me. They've obviously got the wrong times. I'd rung the night before saying I'll be home in the morning. I got to talk to my mother-in-law, and she sounded a bit vague. I can understand why now. Anyway, eventually my brother-in-law rolled up and he said, your wife's not home, she's gone away for a while. Oh, right. I thought the shock was too much, me coming home. And I thought, oh, well, she'll be back in a couple of days. So I went home to our house, and there's a lot of strange things there. There was only one knife, fork and spoon, and one pillow, and one set of sheets, and one blanket, and I'd had the big clean out. But still the penny didn't drop. I was sort of thinking, oh no, she'll be back in a couple of days and everything will be right. And then I found out she'd sort of gone away with another fellow and, you know, moved interstate. And I thought, oh, righto. So I had to sort of find out what was going on. So I got my mother-in-law, who knew the address interstate of where she was, and I was going to go there. And she said, well, don't go on your own. I'm not giving you the address. You can come with me, and don't want you to do anything silly. So we drove to Sydney and met them, and I said, look, you know, you can come home if you want to, but it's up to you. She said, no, I'm not coming home. I said, right, okay, I'll proceed with the divorce. And so I got back and...
Were you that calm?
No. No, I was pretty head up, really, but controlled anger, I suppose, and frustration and confusion, a lot of confusion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, everything sort of, you know. And I got back to Adelaide and went to get some legal aid. I thought legal aid's available from returning veterans. I went to the legal aid office and they said, yes, we recommend that you see this solicitor. I said, oh, good. And what's the aid part? Oh, that's the aid part. We just give you a name and you pay all the fees and everything. Okay, so then I went through the old-fashioned divorce over 18 months and had to prove guilt and all the rest of the rubbish. And yes, so went back to work probably 10 days, fortnight after I got home because there was no money. And these 2 mortgages were in the red and I had to live in the house and sort all that out and go back to work and buy a car and no transport.
How difficult was it to adjust to civilian life again?
I actually couldn't sleep in the bed because it was too soft. And I think I slept on the floor for a couple of nights on a blanket and then gradually sort of weaned myself back into bed and ate lots of steak and good food and local beer and chips and biscuits and stuff like that and chocolates, stuff we couldn't get over there. And mates came around and sort of reconnected. They'd sort of left me pretty high and dry while I was away, but they didn't realise what was going on. And they reconnected and we used to go shooting and drinking and so on.
And what did your mum think about the wife situation?
She never liked the wife, so she thought, well, yeah, it was bound to happen there. But then...
And you didn't see your son at all?
No. I saw him in Sydney and I saw him again 10 years ago as an adult. Yeah. So, but then I got divorced and remarried pretty well straight away to Gisela. So,
how did you meet Gisela?
at the hospital where I met Margaret. The hospital is a meeting place for most couples in those days. 300 nurses, 300 male nurses, some single. Night shift. Gisela came on night shift upstairs. I was in charge downstairs.
So did it take long to adjust then for you?
It did, yes. I was working at the hospital, then the award came through and people heard about that, and that was a bit like compensation to me, you know. You've been through all this rough stuff and your wife's pinged off, but here's a second prize, you know. You can have this silver gong that's minted in London with the Queen's dial on it, and I thought, oh yeah, that's nice. Even though I didn't think I would get it, I thought they were going to take it away before I got it, or after I got it. And a couple of months later, it was Guy Fawkes time, when they used to have firecrackers, and a string of crackers was let off outside the ward that I was in, probably 100 yards away. And bang, 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 and I hit the floor and got behind a big pot plant with a palm in it. And I thought, Struth, what's going on? You know, I'm just so conditioned to hit the deck when the firing starts, and people were sort of, you know, what are you doing? That's all right, you know. And I just went off to the toilet and stood in there for a while. I thought, whew, you know, it really does condition you. And then we got married and we're on our honeymoon driving along, and a car went past and backfired. And I was trying to get in under the pedals and the steering wheel, and Giesel said, "Are you all right?" I said, "Oh." Then I explained to her about the condition. She said, "Oh, boy." And then one night I woke up and I was actually attacking her in bed. I thought, a bit like the monkey attacking me. I'd had this dream and I was being attacked and I was going to get in first, and I had sort of stiffened up my fingers and wrists and I was going to straight in for the throat and sort of smash her throat. And I was sort of all poised, and she, oh, you know, whoa. And there was incidents like that over several years that gradually sort of disappeared.
As a couple, how did you deal with that situation? Because that must have been scary.
Just talked about it, and then I sort of started writing the original book, and she thought, well, that'll be good therapy, and yeah. But I used to go to bed early, and I'm an early bird, and she used to come later, and you know, so there's a bit of overlapping, and we sort of coped. Yeah. I had no idea about PTSD then, or any of that. That sort of came later, and you look back and you think, of course, that's classic. Yeah.
Even with the psychology and psychiatric sort of studies, there was no correlation for you?
No, we're mostly concentrating on schizophrenics and bipolar and depression and mental deficiency. So the shell shock and post-war syndrome and all that, no, didn't even think about it. I was the only one from the hospital that ever went to Viet Nam, and it was a bit of a novelty. And occasionally the press would get me to do a story. Anzac Day'd come up and they'd get this digger's story.
So when was the first decision to go back to Vietnam, and why did you decide to do that?
When I was up in choppers in Vietnam, in between on operations, going out to an op, you'd look at the countryside and think, I was fascinated by it, the paddy fields and the winding rivers and the people and the buffalo and exotic places, and I thought, gee, I'd love to come back when this is finished, when we've won and the place has settled down, I'd come back and visit, you know, this would be great. And then we lost, and I thought, oh, okay, I'll probably never get back to Vietnam, but I would like to. And my mum had written a couple of books, and in '94 she said, you still want to go back to Vietnam? I said, oh yeah, one day when I can afford it. And she said, well, I've got some money, you can pay me back later, but I'd like to go, and why don't we go together? And I thought, well, yeah, righto. So Mum and I went in just before Christmas in '94, and we had Christmas, New Year in Vietnam. We flew into Saigon. We went to a tourist company, and they had a car and a guide and a driver, and they met us at the airport, took us to our hotel. The next day they picked us up and they took us to Nui Dat and Vung Tau and Long Tan and all that. Cost us a fortune, that bit, looking back. And then we joined a tour with Travel Indochina, and we went all the way from Saigon to Da Lat, down to Nha Trang, out to the coast, and all the way up to Hanoi and out to Ha Long Bay, and we thought, this is just fantastic. You know, the scenery, the people, the food, everything was just great. And we'd come in with real apprehension, flying into Saigon. I was sort of, oh, and I looked out the window and I could see bomb craters in the paddy fields still in '94. And I thought, what are those? Oh, they're bomb craters. Oh. And I showed Mum and took photos of them and got into Saigon, and the airport customs people were in sort of military uniforms, and we'd filled out something wrong on the form, and they go and do it again. You know, you idiots, sort of, go and do it again, fools. So Mum was getting a bit grumpy then. She was going to tell them what for, as she often does. I said, settle down, we might be on the next plane home. And I was pretty upset by our reception. But we signed it, did the form again, put it in, and they said, go on, through you go. Righto. And we went through and we met the sign saying Mr. Brown and Mrs. Williams, you know, yes, that's us. Welcome to Vietnam. Oh, good. Are we being followed? And we weren't, and from then on it was just brilliant. A 21-day tour, I think it was. So.
And what was Nui Dat like after all that time?
Nui Dat, that's when I first recollected the pearly gates, having heard about them a lot, and just didn't recall them until I saw them. Met some kids there, and Mum had all these little gifts that she'd saved, little books and pencils and calendars and clothes and all sorts of stuff. And we pulled up on the old airstrip, and the guides got out, and I think they were asking this local bloke who was hanging around how to get around the camp, drive around the perimeter, and he was pointing all over the place. Apparently he was a VC there as a young man about the time the war finished, so that was quite pertinent. And then somebody came up with a handful of dog tags, and I bought them off them for $10, I think, and they're obviously original, and we had a dump there, the old camp, and fire and incinerator and so on, but these had survived the fire, and so I had all these about 16 sets of dog tags, and that was great. And was handing out gifts and taking photos, and our guide was an ex-South Vietnamese, and he was getting information from this ex-VC, and we're not quite sure who the driver was, whether he was ARVN or VC, probably VC, and he was probably there to mine the ARVN bloke. We had a good look around Nui Dat and the airstrip, and found out roughly where I used to be camped, but it was unrecognisable. There's a bit of barbed wire in between some pawpaws that was probably taken from our camp, but the rest you just couldn't recognise it. And the rubber trees were all knocked down for firewood, and there were new ones just growing. So a totally different place.
And you decided on that trip that you would set, because you're going back now to do some real work in Vietnam. How did that come about?
I did the trip with Mum in '94, and then I think it was 2000. I thought, well, that trip I looked after Mum a fair bit, and there's a lot of things I'd like to redo with the same tour company and do it from the other way down. So in 2000 I went back on my own, and I went a couple of days early and went to Hanoi, and I met two Sydney girls. One of them had an uncle in Viet Nam, and he was killed, and his name was Wayne. So I thought, this is a bit spooky, and that's how we introduced, you know, g'day, we introduced later, that's right, the names. We introduced, you know, I'm from Australia and I'm doing this tour. Which tour are you doing? They're doing the same tour, as it turned out. So we had a memorial service on Ha Long Bay for Uncle Wayne, who was killed at Bin Ba. And that tour was just great. And I was supposed to be doing research for my book, and all the questions that I had formulated fell down, but I got a whole heap of other information that sort of came up along the way. This guide had his dad lost a leg at such and such a place, and this bloke's dad was a doctor, and he's, you know, was serving during the war on the other side, and all these different things that happen, and disability centres that we visited, and so on. Then I went back the year after. Other veterans asked me about the tour, and they said, when you go again, we'd like to come too. So I said, yeah, righto. And I think eight of them put their names down on the list, and away we went, a couple of wives, and we did a tour, and we paid it as we went along, and we got a cheap flight and all this. It was a great tour. Went to the disability centres once again. Then my mum wanted to go back again and do some research for another book, and she and another veteran who was pretty crook, he'd had a couple of strokes, he came along with us. So the three of us did from north to south, and went to the disability centres once again, and hospitals, and Mum got a lot of info. Then another tour wanted to go over with me again, so I stick your name in here and we'll all go, and did all the paperwork, and we went, a dozen of us, and a lot of them are mentioned in the book, Pove and so on. And then last year I did another tour. One of the blokes on the previous tour decided he was going to do a few tours. He was going to organise, good organiser. So we did a tour last year, did the leper colonies, the Buddhist orphanages, and we donated musical instruments and money and books and pencils and so on, and arranged for the AusAid to get some money into some of the places. Then this year I joined Project Viet Nam and went over a fortnight before our holiday trip, our Goodwill trip, and 15 of us in a work party renovated a medical centre up near Hanoi, right out in a poor province. Lovely people. We paid everything ourselves, and just good, warm and fuzzy sort of stuff. And a medical team did work in the town and in Hanoi, and they took medical equipment over, and we've got sort of container loads that we get organised to take over, used equipments from different hospitals, and funds that we raise from raffles and so on, donations. So I did that fortnight. Then we had a 28-day tour from the very top on the China border at Sapa all the way down to the Mekong disability centres again, some regular, some new ones. And in the meantime, I've done an English teaching course, and I hope to go back and teach English on a regular basis at a place called Quignon, or wherever they need me and wherever I can fit it in.
Do you think going back helped with whatever was left over from your experience?
It definitely helped me, and a lot of veterans that, I think all the veterans that have come on the tours with me, including Johnny Hector, this last one, he said he should have done it earlier, and he's glad he's done it now before he's too old and decrepit. All of them have benefited from being there, and most of them have either gone back or intend to go back and just visit again or meet the people again or send photos. And we've got an Arvin fellow coming out tomorrow with our guide who's over there. He's coming back from a trip tomorrow and bringing the local guide with him for a month. We've got permits and visas and so on. But a lot of veterans will say, no, never get me back there. It's just, no, I still hate the place. It stinks. The people, I hate the people. And you just can't change their mind. So you just say, right, okay.
How were you changed from when you went to Vietnam to when you came back? Do you think you changed as a person?
The first tour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the actual war
I came
experience.
back, I think, emotionally numbed. Yeah. I think before that I was a fairly gentle, shy, innocent sort of a fellow, and the things I saw and experienced, and possibly the chemicals that were introduced into us through all the sprayings and drinking and eating and living in the chemical conditions, which is a really big factor that I probably should have mentioned a lot earlier. I think the chemicals affected a lot of veterans, and even if a veteran has not had his life threatened, which is a key factor in post-traumatic stress disorder, the taking in of chemicals over long term gives a similar debilitating illness to PTSD, but it's not recognised by our government as such. They just still say PTSD. Okay, we'll put that tag on and that'll do. But I think with the chemicals, the experiences, and the family traumas, it all sort of, it made me a bit less sensitive, a bit more blunt, a bit hard. Yeah. Although I still think I'm fairly soft. And
Yeah, I mean, the way that you talk about going back and seeing the country and the people is quite sensitive. Yeah, so at some point, you've come to terms with some of that
Yeah.
war experience, do you
Yeah.
think?
I think going back and writing about it and writing poetry about it too. I've written poems about Long Tan and reuniting with Pove's people and Halong Bay and Nui Dat. It's just, it's been inside my brain, but then released. I wrote 3 poems in an hour after a day trip to Nui Dat and Long Tan. We came back to Vung Tau that evening at 5 o'clock. By 6 o'clock I'd written 3 fantastic poems. And I just couldn't believe that sort of stuff had just, with hardly a change of word and review later. And people that were on the day trip with me said, "When did you write this?" I said, "Just now."
Yeah, it wasn't your choice to go. In fact, you tried to avoid it.
No, I tried
for a
like
long
hell to
time.
avoid it. Yeah.
Were you bitter at the government after?
Yes, yeah, long time. But gradually over the years I've realised that sort of it was programmed. If I didn't have to go, somebody else would have had to go in my place. How would they have handled it? I've survived, therefore, it hasn't been all that bad. Bad enough, but, did it. And some people benefited from me being there, and I tried pretty hard.
What are you most proud of your time in service?
Helping the mates, yeah, and still being with them, like the one yesterday, out of the blue. He was wounded at Goodwood with 17 holes in him, and he rang me yesterday. He'd heard that I'd written a book on the grapevine, hadn't seen him since that day, and we had a half-hour chat on the phone, and we'll probably contact each other and meet, and I've posted off the book first thing, and he gets a mention in it. Smithy, one word.
It's a year of your, or almost a year of your life, and yet those connections are so significant. Why do you think that is?
It's all the dramas that happen in a concentrated period. One bloke that I've written about in the book, he was in Delta Company and his mate Joe got killed. He said a psychiatrist or a psychologist asked him to encapsulate his period in Viet Nam as an overall segment of a book, and he said, first 20 years of my life, a couple of pages, Viet Nam, almost a whole book, the rest of my life since Viet Nam, a couple of pages. So Viet Nam was the thing, and any vet will say, or most vets will say, they think about Viet Nam, or Vietnam crops up every day of their life.
Is that true for you?
Yeah. Perhaps because I go back there and I write about it and talk about it and take lots of photos and have lots of contacts and emails from people over there and that sort of thing.
Did you see other blokes really not handle life at all ever after that? I know you had times, but...
Yeah, one bloke that only got his story afterwards. He came home. He had been a forward scout over there, and he was just an average digger up to learn, let's shoot them all, let's wipe them out and all that. And he shot this bloke, and he went and searched him, and he had a photo of a wife and 2 kids in his pocket, and that just destroyed him. He went through the rest of the tour, a shattered man, and came home, and I think he built a bunker down the backyard, and he used to live most of the time down in that bunker. And then I think he's gradually coming out of it now. But he wanted me to write his story in the next book that I do. I said, we'll have to wait the one after the next one. And he sent me photos of the copy of that photo of the woman and 2 children. Yeah.
We sort of have found your way that you've told these events. You've been so stable and succinct with it. What do you think has kept you or brought you to that point?
Having put it into perspective, I think by going back and seeing that it was all for nothing, and that I thought it was, after I've been there a couple of months, that I thought it was a bit chonky, the whole deal, and realising now that it is, even though some people still say, we should be back there, and they're MIAs and all sorts of stuff like that. I think I've relived it, I've dusted it off, written about it thoroughly and researched it pretty thoroughly. I've got a whole library out there with Vietnam books, probably 100 or so, and anything on TV and that on Vietnam I absorb it, and I guess it's all sorted out for me.
So do you think in some ways people that actually try and completely push it away and don't want to see anything or hear anything, or do you think that's not as healthy as absorbing it?
Yeah, I think they're in denial. It happened, but it's their method of coping with it. It's not my method. I probably didn't have much choice because I got home and I got the decoration. The whole of South Australia knew it was in the paper several times. And, so I had to sort of blurt it out. Why were you there? What did you get it for? And so I've been open about it. And a lot of them could follow that track, but they haven't. And the more they've tucked it away, it's gone right back into the recesses, and they don't want it. It's too hard to dust it off, perhaps. It's simpler to keep it in the box and don't talk about it.
Do you have a final comment that you'd want to put on record about your war or life experience for people that would hear this interview in the future?
I think war is to be gone into only as a last resort when you're actually defending your country against another country's invasion. This preemptive strikes leaves a lot to be desired. I mean, there probably are certain cases to be where it's a good option, but very, very infrequent. So I think just go very, very carefully and beware of politicians that get you into war, because they are very rarely seen at the front line, only in set-ups and staged get-togethers with diggers in starched uniforms and cans of beer in their hand and big smiles on their faces, as if, you know, this is what the war is all about, not at the front line with the bodies and the mayhem. We don't hear anything about the wounded from Iraq or Afghanistan, all very quiet. The poor widow, the only widow that's occurred recently, her benefits are minimal, and she's still fighting for justice. So war is to be deplored and avoided if possible.
Well, it's been an honour to hear your story. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
For us too, indeed.
Long Tan Memorial. White Christian cross and Buddhist urn gleam brightly through the trees as pilgrims tread the red mud path neath Long Tan's tepid breeze. We come to honour all who died amidst the battle's roar, victims all, united now, way up where eagles soar. Beyond the gates, beyond the chains, beyond all earthly pain, they fought and died in holocaust of thunder, mud and rain. Flowers now to beautify a place that stank of death, and count our blessings, one and all, that we may still draw breath, to speak of those who braved the foe, and rest neath Long Tan's sod, to each his own deliverance sought, through Buddha and through God. Peace prevails, the cross remains, as soldier mates recall, their brothers lost, so early gone, Aussie diggers standing tall.
Was that written over there?
That was written as one of the 3 poems I wrote in an hour after a day visit to Nui Dat and Long Tan and so on. I just got emotionally sort of all revved up that day.
Yeah.
The War Dog Memorial down at Alexandra Headland at Maroochydore, about the tracker dogs in Viet Nam. Down jungle tracks through shot and shell, ears pricked high, keen sense of smell, our tracker dogs with care and poise, alert to ambush, foreign noise. Never whimper, whine nor bark, their service honoured with this plaque. No medals pinned to hairy chest, left behind, they were the best. That's for the tracker dogs.
And
This book, Medic, that I wrote 18 months ago, had published 18 months ago, I'm sorry. It took many, many years to write.
great, thank you.
In my view, Australia was conned into Viet Nam by a concocted domino theory, an orchestrated Gulf of Tonkin incident and pressure from the CIA. The war was an horrendous quagmire, supported for more than a decade by a gullible public. The Vietnamese, in my experience, found the American war just another inconvenience along the route to reunification. They generally hold no bitterness toward previous foes and do not openly gloat over victory. I've read widely on the subject since coming home and now grudgingly admire the former enemy for their tenacity and dedication to their struggle for reunification and independence. Our cause had little basis in fact. I detested their brutal methods just as I detested the brutality of our allies when civilian massacres and routine torture of prisoners occurred. Our former foes were physically and mentally tougher and in for the long haul with definite goals, whereas we tended to focus on body count and 365 and a wakey. Had I not played my small part in the conflict, my mother may not have been drawn into her important role, that of revealing the horrific aftermath of the toxic chemical exposure. Had my birth date marble not been hand-drawn from the Tattersalls barrel by federal member for Corangamite, Mr. E.D. McKinnon, MP, I wouldn't have had the real-life experience of war, met mates who shared the dangers as their medic, waiting for the urgent call, medic up the front.